True Detective opens with the appearance of two former detectives in 2012 who are being asked for information by the police. They are a detective named Marty Hard and a retired detective named Rush Cole. In the past, in 1995 to be precise, the two of them were assigned to investigate a murder case in a sugarcane field. The two of them found the corpse of a naked woman in a sitting position of prayer. On the girl's head were deer antlers and rose thorns, while a strange circle-like symbol was on her back. The police still haven't identified who this woman is, but from racial observations, they saw that this woman was killed by being stabbed in the stomach many times, then her neck was slashed, but her body was killed in another place a few days ago, then only moved to that place. Around the corpse was a strange object made of twigs. It was hanging on a tree right above the corpse. Rush wondered if this murder would happen again, or even if it had happened before. According to him, this killer was very specific, like a ritual, based on the characteristics of this corpse, such as scratched knees and bad teeth. Rush also thinks this woman is a prostitute. It is possible that the killer did not know this woman and targeted prostitutes. Of course, this is just an assumption. So Marty didn't just accept it until further examination was done. But Rush guaranteed that the body was not the first victim of the perpetrator of this murder. Rush and Marty have only been partners for 3 months, and Rush is a private person. Marty wants to introduce Rush to his family, so he invites Rush for dinner. When it started to get dark, they returned to the office. Marty is a senior detective and the only one who can report these murders to the mayor. This is the first time a case like this has happened in their city, so the mayor plans to hold a press conference. Suddenly, the mayor asks Marty for his opinion about Rush. Marty replies that Rush is a loner and doesn't like socializing, but he thinks Rush is brilliant and doesn't get shaken easily. Not long after, when Marty made his report, Rush went first to a very mysterious trailer park. It turned out that the place was a relatively well-known house of prostitution. Rush goes to the bar to ask some prostitutes. Do they know the woman who was just killed in the sugarcane field? The majority of prostitutes in that place felt they did not recognize the characteristics of the women mentioned by Rush. They also felt like they didn't lose anyone in that place. The next day, Rush arrives first and tells Marty that the victim has been identified as Dora Kelly Lance, who was indeed a prostitute. They checked Dora's body, but they didn't find anyone's fingerprints on her body, but her body tested positive for illegal drugs. This means Dora was forced to take drugs, tied up, tortured, and then displayed in the forest. Not long after, they went to the rundown neighborhood around where Dora's body was found. One of the older men at the scene asked if the woman was a little girl named Mary Fontenot, who disappeared several years ago. But of course, Dora is not Mary because Dora is an adult woman. Then, they went to church to meet a priest. They ask about Mary's disappearance, but they don't know much. Rush also asked about the symbols and triangles from wooden branches that they had previously found around the woman's corpse. The priest did not know what the circle symbol meant, but he knew that the triangular twig was one of the tools to ward off demons and catch demons that approached. Not long afterward, they met the sheriff to ask about Mary's case, which the police had not followed up on. The sheriff replies that the case was in the hands of the previous sheriff. Sheriff said that Mary was taken by her biological father because her mother had problems such as dependence on illegal drugs. Marty also knows that a child reported being chased in the woods several months ago, but the police did not follow up on this case again. The sheriff replies that the little girl said there was a green-eared spaghetti giant who chased her into the woods. Police thought the child was hallucinating, so they chose not to follow up. The next day, they met Dora's ex-husband, who was being detained. His name was Charlie. They haven't been in touch for a long time. Charlie didn't even know that Dora had been murdered, but a few weeks ago, Dora called him. Charlie needs money, and Dora owes him money. He asks Dora's friend Carla to call her, but when Dora calls her, she gets drunk and says she wants to become a nun and meet a king. In the evening, Rush comes to Marty's house for dinner, but arrives drunk. Rush meets Marty's wife, Maggie, and her 2 daughters. Rush told them he was from Texas, but grew up in Alaska. While in Texas, Rush worked in the narcotics department before being transferred to Louisiana. Rush continued to talk, even about his problems. He said he was married but divorced after his child died in an accident. The next day at the office, some fellow detectives who were helping them told them that someone knew about Mary's uncle who lived nearby. Even though the murder victim was Dora, people thought that Mary's disappearance was related to Dora. So they also investigated Mary's disappearance. Not long afterward, the sheriff brought in the town pastor named Tuttle. Because Dora's case has not yet been solved, this makes residents worried. That's why the pastor suggested creating a joint team to investigate crimes with anti-Christian connotations. But Rush showing indicated that he did not like this offer. Not long after, they went to the house of Mary's uncle, who was suffering from depression. Marty asks about Mary. Was the girl not lost and taken by her biological father? Her uncle denied it, but at the same time, they explained that they had not had contact with Mary's father for a long time. Rush also checked the surrounding area. He came out of the house and saw a large abandoned chicken coop. At that place, Rush found something. He calls Marty to check on him. It turned out that he found a twig with the same shape as near Dora's corpse. This leads Rush to believe that the person who kidnapped Mary and the person who killed Dora are the same, or at least they knew each other. Then, the two detectives met Dora's mother. Dora's mother explained that Dora's father died in an accident in the 1990s. Dora was a troubled child, but after separating from Charlie, Dora started to improve about a month ago. Dora meets him and says that she started going to church more often, but the mother didn't know which church. Then, they continued their investigation by meeting Dora's friend, Carla. One name Charlie had mentioned to them before. The last time they met, Dora also told Carla that she had started going to church often, but Carla didn't know where it was either. Several months ago, Dora moved house and lived in a shelter in the south. At night, even though Marty was married, it turned out that he had a very young mistress named Lisa. Marty often spends the night at Lisa's house, so they've been doing this for a while. Elsewhere, Rush meets again with a prostitute he previously interrogated, but this time, Rush comes to buy sleeping pills. Because Rush often has insomnia without sleeping pills. Rush also asks the woman about a prostitution scene in the south, which might be where Dora lives. The woman answered that she didn't know much, but she had heard of places like houses of prostitution in the south. The next day, Marty went to the office without going home first. Even Marty still wears the same clothes. Rush notices that Marty's body odor is different than usual, so he tries to tease Marty, but unexpectedly, Marty gets offended and almost hits him. Despite that, Rush wasn't afraid, but he didn't attack Marty back. Rush is not easily provoked, even though he can easily beat Marty. Meanwhile, Marty chooses to let Rush go. Not long after, they went south, but they had difficulty finding a place for prostitution. They asked 2 garage mechanics, but the 2 mechanics would have to wait to talk to them. Marty gives up, but Rush comes back and attacks both of these mechanics. Rush works more often in the field and can control the situation very well. Even though it was 2 against 1, Rush could still beat them easily. So, after leaving the workshop, he already had information on the location they were looking for. They entered the woods and were able to find several parked trailers. It seems they were right, because this place is filled with beautiful women in sexy clothes. They immediately met the leader of the place, and it turned out that she recognized Dora. The woman said that Dora had indeed lived there. A young prostitute who is very close to Dora says that Dora is a good person. Dora had been living there for a few weeks and perhaps changed after she started going to church. Marty doesn't seem to like the girl because he thinks she's too young to work as a prostitute, but there's nothing Marty can do about it. Before going home, Marty gave the girl some money and hoped she would find it. Marty hopes that the girl will find another job and change her life. Finally, Rush already has Dora's diary, which was left at the prostitution place. In the book, it was written that when Dora closed her eyes, she saw the Yellow King Carcosa running in the forest. Marty thinks Dora was drunk when she wrote the diary, but they find church flyers from the book. They suspected that the church was a place Dora often visited. The next day on holiday, Marty spent the day with his wife's family. However, Marty's relationship with his in-laws is not very close, but they also don't hate each other. Meanwhile, Maggie's mother feels something strange about Maggie, but the woman says she is fine. Meanwhile, Rush spends his vacation looking for information about Dora and Mary, although he still needs to get something. The next day, Marty and Rush look for a church from a flyer in Dora's book. They had difficulty looking for the church, but when they found it, it turned out that it had been burned and had not been there for a long time. They checked the church, and of course, they found no one. But there is strange graffiti on the walls. They saw a picture of a figure on the wall in precisely the same position as Dora when she was found dead in the sugarcane forest. A few days later, they found a tent full of people. A pastor named Joel Theriot was preaching to a reasonably large congregation. Rush is not a religious person, so he thinks that this is a scam to take money from people who are hungry for guidance. After the event was over, they showed Joel a photo of Dora. The priest didn't know the girl's name in the photo, but thought he had met Dora several times. Joel had preached in this tent 6 months after his church burned down. Someone told Marty that he thought he saw Dora with a tall man. She remembered this because the man had a burn on his jaw, but they didn't know the man. On the other hand, Rush finds a criminal record belonging to one of Joel's staff members, Bird. This man had special needs, but Bird had been arrested for theft. They suspect Bird because mentally unstable people usually do things like this. Joel asks if Dora was raped. Rush confirmed the priest's question. Joel said that if Rush talked to Bird alone, he would believe that Bird was innocent. Not long after speaking with Bird, Rush was convinced that Bird was not the perpetrator. He was convinced it was because Bird was crazy and even cut off his genitals while in prison. Bird was the only person Rush suspected, so Rush thought the perpetrator was not the church staff. The only clue was a tall man with a burn on his jaw. A few days later, on the weekend, Rush is at Marty's house with Maggie, but Marty is outside at home. When Marty returned home, he noticed that the grass in his yard had been cut. It turns out Rush returned the lawnmower he borrowed, and to thank him, he mowed Marty's lawn. Before returning home, Marty restrained him. Marty told Rush that he didn't like Rush being with his wife when he wasn't home. He advised Rush not to repeat an incident like this. The next day, they found a man who had tall features and had burns on his jaw. He was interrogated by Rush until he cried in fear, but in the end Rush knew that this man was not the person he was looking for. Rush continued to work looking for information from the case files until late at night. Not long after, he went to a bar because Maggie wanted to introduce her friend Jennifer to Rush. This girl was a nurse, and even though Rush was a secretive person, he didn't avoid this match. Rush actually felt quite comfortable with Jennifer. At the bar, Marty suddenly saw Lisa with another man. Marty excuses himself as going to fill up on drinks to talk to Lisa in secret. Marty told Lisa that he didn't like her being with this man. Lisa answered that she wanted to end her relationship with Marty because she'd also wanted to get married. After the event was over, Marty, drunk and angry, came to Lisa's house. He went on a rampage there and attacked Lisa's lover. Of course, this problem made Marty and Lisa's relationship even worse. The next day, when Marty comes to the office, Rush shows the results of his research so far about cases of bodies found dead in the flood, but Rush thinks that the bodies were killed by the same people who killed Dora, because they had the same wound, tested positive for LSD, and even had a circle symbol on their back. The dead woman's grandfather is still alive, so Rush thinks that they should meet him. The scene shows them going to meet the victim's grandfather, who lives in a small town. The grandfather said that he was sure that a fisherman's daughter would not die from drowning. This grandfather also explained that his grandchild had a boyfriend named Reggie Ledoux. His granddaughter also attended a Christian school supported by the Tuttle program when it was still open. They went to the abandoned school, but only saw a man who was still assigned to look after the grass on the school grounds. Rush doesn't check out the school because Marty suddenly receives information about Reggie's criminal record. Reggie was once arrested for being linked to the illegal drug LSD, a drug that was also found in Dora's body, but now Reggie has been released. For them, now Reggie is the main suspect in Dora's murder, but the first person they meet is Charlie. Because it turns out that Reggie's cellmate when he was in prison was Charlie. They came for questioning, and Charlie described Reggie as tall, big, and scary. One day, Charlie showed Reggie a photo of Dora. Charlie also knows that Reggie can make drugs and is also a person who often has hallucinations, because Reggie once said that in the South there is a place where rich people worship the devil, a place called Carcosa, and the Yellow King who sacrifices small children and women. The circle symbol on their backs was a sign that they were followers of that sect. Charlie says if they ask a guy named Tyron, maybe they can find Reggie. A few days later, Lisa complained to Marty about vandalizing her house, but Marty, a police officer, testified that he found drugs in Lisa's house, even though it was all just a lie. After going through the trial with Lisa, Marty goes looking for Tyron with Rush. The first person they met was Tyron's mother, but the woman hadn't seen her son in a long time. The woman provided information that Tyron had a girlfriend who was a stripper. They meet Tyron's girlfriend, but the woman says that they broke up a long time ago. Then they looked for information by asking the bartender at the place about Tyron. They continued to work until several days before they could return home. When Marty returns home, he sees a suitcase and a letter. It turns out that while he was away, Lisa, angry because of Marty's previous false statement, came to tell Maggie about their affair. This makes Maggie angry and wants to separate. At night, even though Marty is having family problems, he still decides to look for Tyron. He managed to find the man, and without hesitation attacked him. Marty asks where Reggie is. Tyron replies that he heard that Reggie still makes drugs, but no longer sells them. Now Reggie only makes drugs for a motorcycle gang in Texas called the Iron Crusaders. Marty immediately told Rush the information he had found. The young man, who had served in the narcotics division in Texas, immediately knew the gang because he had infiltrated this gang. Marty comes to Rush's house to discuss the next steps. Rush showed the heavy weapons he kept while still undercover with the gang. As far as he knew, his cover hadn't been blown yet, so they could infiltrate again to look for Reggie. Rush explains that the Iron Crusaders are the most violent motorcycle gang in Texas and control the drug trade there. To make himself look like a drug user, Rush injected ink and cayenne pepper so that his skin looked bruised from the drug injection. Apart from that, Rush also bought drugs from the police station to complete his disguise. After all their needs were met, they went to Texas. Before that, Rush also gave Marty a cell phone whose number only he knew as a means of communication between them. That night, Rush went to the bar, while Marty would wait in the parking area and wait for Rush's code. There, he met one of his old friends named Ginger. Rush told him that for several years, he had worked in Mexico for a cloth merchant. Rush wants to create a partnership by exchanging his cocaine for the LSD that Reggie makes. Ginger says he doesn't know whether to trust Rush, so to prove herself, Rush has to help his pull off a robbery. In the end, Rush was forced to accept this offer. Ginger immediately took Rush to his headquarters to meet the other two members. The plan was that they would disguise themselves as police and rob a black gang. It turns out they had kidnapped one of the black gang members, which would make it look as if they were the police arresting the gangsters. They went to the black gang neighborhood because they were wearing police clothes, and no one dared to disturb them. Rush was dropped off at the back of the house while the others entered from the front door. They ambushed the gang's headquarters and gathered everyone in one place. They had 1 minute to move all the money into this place, but one of the Rush members shot one of the gang members, resulting in a shootout. The fight can't be avoided. They are surrounded, and Rush is attacked. Everyone is killed except Ginger, whom he takes out by using a telephone in one of the houses. Rush calls Marty to pick him up. Not long after, Marty arrives and manages to save Rush and Ginger. Then Rush explains that he saved Ginger because he wanted Ginger to take him to meet Reggie. After thinking for a while, Ginger took Rush to meet Reggie to talk. Rush asks to work together to exchange his cocaine for LSD made by Reggie, but Reggie doesn't need the extra money right now, so he declines Rush's offer. Rush thought hard to find another solution to this problem, so he asked Ginger to show him where Reggie concocted the drugs. Ginger shows the coordinates near the forest. The place was full of dangerous traps on every side of the forest, as if to protect something within it. But the two detectives, who were used to traps like that, could get through them quickly. Finally, they saw the only building in the slums of that place. They could see Reggie entering the house from their hiding place, so they quickly ambushed the place. Initially, Marty restrained a thin man other than Reggie and took the man out of the house. Rush is responsible for looking after the man, while Marty returns to the house to look for the other perpetrator. At the same time, Reggie saw Rush standing with a gun outside the house, but suddenly, Marty came out of the house and immediately shot the man in the head to death. Reggie, who was frightened, without thinking, immediately ran into the forest until he was caught in his trap. He immediately died, with his body shattered into pieces by his bomb trap. Rush goes into the house to check on what made Marty angry. He found 2 children being held there. They are 2 children who disappeared a few weeks ago. It turns out Reggie kidnapped them. The condition of the 2 children was unfortunate. A boy died a few days ago, while a girl is still alive. They immediately took the 2 children to get help and returned them to their families. Due to Reggie's death, the Dora murder case is officially closed. After that, Marty and Rush became the town's heroes. Life slowly improves, and Marty tries to improve his relationship with Maggie for their children. Even though it took a long time, they finally got back together. At the same time, Rush is still with Jennifer. 7 years later, in 2002, Marty's children are teenagers, and Marty's life is going smoothly. Likewise with Rush and Jennifer, even though they still don't have children. Rush's reputation as a great investigator is a mainstay of the police. When a suspect doesn't want to confess, the police will send Rush. One day, Rush was interrogating a murder suspect. Rush tries to be patient while trying to get him to admit his actions. This man admitted his actions and realized he had made a fatal mistake. He wanted to make a deal. The man knew that Dora's killer was not Reggie, and to this day, that person is still killing. Of course, Rush didn't believe it. But the man insisted that he had met the assassin called the Yellow King. Hearing this, Rush became angry and attacked the man. Rush felt he was considered incompetent at work, so he was so angry with the man in front of him that several police had to work together to arrest him. The man's words kept running through Rush's head, so he invited Marty to meet the man, but when they arrived at the prison, the man was dead by suicide. From security cameras, they only saw the man leave detention to take a call from his lawyer, and then he returned to his cell accompanied by 2 police officers. After that, they didn't see the man come out of the cell until his blood flowed out of the cell. Rush is suspicious of the police accompanying the man. They were named Childress and Mahoney, but before investigating the 2 police, they traced the location of the person who called the suspect who died in the prison cell. However, they noticed that the area used to make the call was a public telephone, meaning that the man did not receive a call from his lawyer. Then, the scene shows Rush going alone to the school he went to before. When he entered the school building, he saw the place was dark and damp. Rush could see many scary pictures on the walls of the building, and he also found twigs arranged in a triangle, like the ones where Dora's body was found, but in more significant quantities. Rush continues to conduct his private investigation without Marty. He continues to see information from families who have missing children. One of the victim's parents explained that the police had stopped looking for their child because a crocodile had eaten their child. She also explained that her son attended one of the Christian schools sponsored by Tuttle in another city. Elsewhere, Marty goes to a cell phone shop to buy a new cell phone after finishing shopping. He decided to go to the bar first. There, he tried his new cell phone. He also met the cell phone seller he had met before. It turns out this woman was named Beth, a young prostitute that Marty and Rust met while looking for Dora. Because of Marty's influence, Beth has now changed her life. Meanwhile, Rush meets Mr. Joel, who has given up being a pastor. Rush met with him to ask what he knew about Tuttle's sponsorship of Christian schools. Joel explained that he had been a teacher at one of those schools. One night, when Joel was cleaning the library, he accidentally dropped an old book. From the book, Joel found several photos of children without clothes who seemed to be sleeping. Mr. Joel immediately reported this to the vice principal named Austin, but he ended up getting angry at Mr. Joel for mentioning this issue. That's the reason Mr. Joel decided to stop being a teacher at that place. On the other hand, Marty meets Beth again. He is amazed that a simple thing he did could change someone's life, but in the end, Marty betrays Maggie again by having an affair with Beth. Several days later, Rush and Marty are assigned to investigate a mother who killed her own child. Because of Rush's great abilities, he managed to get this mother to admit what she had done by writing it down. Rush asks Marty to write the woman's confession because he has something to do. It was at this time that Marty began to dislike Rush ordering him around. Marty realizes he is not as good as Rush at solving cases. He realizes, because of Rush, he has a good work record. However, he didn't like being bossed around like that. Because of this problem, their relationship started to deteriorate. In the next scene, we see Rush visiting a mental hospital for children. He went there to meet a girl who was the child he saved from Reggie's hands. The girl has a mental disorder and doesn't want to talk to anyone, but when Rush asks who was there who hurt him, the girl replies that the guy with the scar on his face is the worst. Remembering that incident made this girl scared and became hysterical. So Rush had to leave immediately. This news quickly reached the ears of the police chief. Rush tells the police chief that he believes that something bad is still happening and has not been solved. He was sure that Reggie was not the only perpetrator of this kidnapping and murder, but he had not found any clues. One day, Maggie wants to wash her clothes, and she is surprised to find Marty washing his clothes. He felt something strange and checked Marty's phone. At this moment, Maggie finds a sexy photo of Beth without clothes. Now Maggie knows that Marty betrayed her again, but this time, Maggie takes it calmly, as if nothing had happened. Elsewhere, Rush goes to a Christian school led by Tuttle. Rush requested staff data from Tuttle's sponsorship of Christian schools several years ago. Tuttle was willing to provide that data to Rush within a few days. Rush also asks about Austin's vice principal, who intimidated Joel into quitting as a teacher. Tuttle responded that Austin had been dismissed for embezzling school funds and that he was dead. The next day, Tuttle reported it to the police chief, calling Rush and scolding him. Tuttle was angry because they were interrogating him like a suspect. Hearing complaints like that from people who were quite influential in the city made the police chief suspend Rush for 1 month. In the evening, Maggie suddenly came to see Rush at his house. Maggie tells him that Marty is cheating on her again. Maggie wants revenge by having sex with Rush. Unexpectedly, the man did not resist and accepted Maggie's request. But after they finished, they realized what they had done was wrong, so they greatly regretted it. Rush immediately told Maggie to leave his house while scolding her. When Marty returns home, Maggie is waiting to greet him. With a calm face, Maggie tells Marty that she has been in sex with Rush. This immediately makes Marty angry, but Maggie knows that Marty cannot hurt her. The next day, Marty heard that Rush had come to the office. To release his anger, Marty immediately attacks Rush. This time, Rush fought back, but he held back. Even though he could beat Marty easily, people separated them, and since that day, they have not seen each other again. They were both called to the police chief's office. Rush was suspended, but he decided to stop being a police officer. 10 years later, in 2012, Marty and Rush returned from the police station after being questioned by the police, as at the beginning of the series. This was the first time they had met, and Marty had put the past behind him. They went to a bar to drink together. Rush explained that until now, he was still investigating the kidnapping of children and women in Louisiana. He couldn't believe the police because the police covered up this case. Rush needs Marty's help because, according to him, they haven't solved Dora's murder case. At night, they go to Rush's private storage area. In that place, Rush kept all the clues he had. The biggest mystery in this case is the Yellow King and Carcosa. The missing children and women were within a 10-mile radius of the Christian school funded by Tuttle. Rush believes Tuttle wants to get involved with the Dora case because Tuttle is connected to this case. Rush met someone who had attended Tuttle's Christian school some time ago. Rush asked if the person had experienced any strange events at the school. The man answered that one night he had difficulty moving until he thought he was going to die, but he could still hear and see through his slightly opened eyelids. He saw several men in animal masks taking photos of him and several other children without clothes. He remembered that of the men, there were 3 young men. Not everyone wore masks, and one had wounds on his face. Rush thinks that one of the teachers is the perpetrator of the murder. This is why some children say that a green-eared spaghetti monster is chasing them, because the perpetrators are wearing masks. Rush also showed Marty some photos from an area festival. This photo contains a small child or woman who is made to look like Dora. Rush wants Marty to take the police files on the murder and missing persons cases to the police station. Marty asks what happened to Tuttle. Rush answered that, at this time, Tuttle was dead. Rush explained that he often sneaked into Tuttle's house to look for evidence. One night, he found a safe containing several photos of small children with their eyes closed, but the most surprising thing was that Rush showed him a videotape. Marty saw in the recording that several masked men were holding a little girl. The little girl was raped and murdered, making Marty unable to watch for too long. Rush tells that the child is Mary Fontenot at the story's beginning. Rush also explained that he did not kill Tuttle. According to him, the stronger people realized that Tuttle could reveal their cult, so they killed Tuttle. After seeing and hearing all this information, Marty is willing to help Rush. They move the file to Marty's office. It turns out that Marty has quit being a police officer and opened a private detective agency. Marty goes to the police station and asks for help by telling them he plans to become a crime book writer. So he asked for files on kidnappings and murders in the 1990s. After getting this file, Marty goes to the bar where Rush works. Marty tells Rush that Mary Fontenot's files have disappeared. Rush introduced Marty to the man who owned the bar, Robert. He was also a victim of the child they kidnapped. These two detectives started their investigation by meeting Reggie's brother, who worked in a repair shop. They asked about the man with the wound on his face. He remembered that the man was part of the Letty family, but didn't know who the man was. Then they met an older woman named Dolores, Tuttle's parents' former servant. She explained that Tuttle's father had many children outside of marriage. Rush asked about the man with the wound on his face. Unexpectedly, Dolores remembered that person. Dolores explains that she is the grandson of Tuttle's father from the Childress family, and the wound on her face was her father's own doing. Rush also showed a picture of a branch formed into a triangle. Dolores asks if they know Carcosa. Dolores suddenly became hysterical, so Rush and Marty had to leave immediately. Time elapsed. Marty went back to examining Mary Fontenot's file. The person handling this case is a detective named Steve Gerasi. Currently, Steve is a sheriff in another town. The next day, Marty deliberately invites Steve to play golf so he can talk. Marty discusses the Mary Fontenot case. Steve explained that Mary was taken away by her father, so he didn't investigate the case. The person who told him was the previous sheriff, Ted Childress. A few days later, Marty and Steve meet again to catch fish in the river, but it is a trap because Marty points a gun at him to interrogate Steve. Elsewhere, two policemen are searching for a burned-out church to the south, but they get lost. They asked a man who was mowing the grass at the cemetery. The man directed them to their destination. It turns out this man had burns on his cheek, and this was the man Rush and Marty were looking for. This man is named Errol Childress. He lives in a rundown house in the forest. There he lived with his wife, Betty. Elsewhere, Rush shows Steve the previous horrific footage. It scared Steve to see the tape. Steve didn't know anything about this cult because he was following his superior's orders. Rush immediately believed Steve's words and let Steve go, but he wanted Steve not to do anything. To threaten him, Rush warned Steve by telling Robert to shoot Steve's car. Not long after, Rush and Marty return to headquarters. They have to look for Tuttle's relative, Childress, but Marty's attention is drawn to the previous image of a mask with green ears. Marty compares two photos taken from a house in Dora's neighborhood. It turned out that the house had just been painted green, meaning that this green ear was the person who painted the house, and the perpetrator was the perpetrator who painted the house. They went to the house, but the original owner had already moved to a nursing home. They met her and asked if the woman still remembered that in 1995 who painted her house. This woman remembers it but doesn't remember the person who painted it. She remembered that person had a scar on her face. Rush asked whether her husband often reported taxes. This tax data showed that the house painting contract was given to a company called Billy Childress and Sons. They went to the company address the next day and finally arrived at Errol's house. When knocking on the door, Marty immediately meets with Betty, but she won't let him into the house. Despite this, Marty barges in. Meanwhile, Rush checked the huts around the house. From a distance, Rush can see Errol, but Errol runs away into the forest. Meanwhile, Marty checks the house and sees that it is very dirty. He realized that the only people who lived in places like this were the mentally challenged. There, he sees Betty, who laughs and reminds him that Errol is worse than anyone. Marty immediately dashed out to Rush's location and wanted to help him. But instead, he went to the hut and found the body of Errol's father tied up in a terrible condition. Meanwhile, Rush continued walking into the forest and found the ruins of a destroyed building. Errol said that that place was Carcosa. The sound in that place echoed so that Rush didn't know where Errol was. Rush continued to enter the carcass deeper until he saw a series of twigs with 3 human skulls. Rush was also amazed when he saw a strange picture on the ceiling of the building, which caused Errol to stab him in the stomach. Errol is so strong that he can lift Rush's body, making him helpless. However, Rush managed to free himself, even though he was seriously injured. Marty arrives and shoots Errol, but Errol manages to fight back by throwing a hammer at Marty. When Errol is about to kill Marty, Rush raises a gun and manages to shoot Errol in the head, making the big man die immediately on the spot. Even though Errol died, they both had to pay a heavy price with bodies full of wounds. Marty tries to help Rush by covering the stab wound in his stomach. At night, the police finally came to save them. After regaining consciousness and his condition improving, the police told Marty that Errol and his family were running a satanic cult, and that they were also pedophiles. A few days later, Rush also managed to survive a more serious condition. Well, that's how this series ends. That's the storyline of the first season of the True Detective series. The True Detective Season 2 opens in a bar. We see a young policeman named Ray Valcoro coming to meet a man named Frank Semyon. Several weeks ago, Valcoro's wife was raped, and the police have not yet found the perpetrator. Frank calls Valcoro to help him because he knows who raped his wife. Frank's men knew the man was a drug addict and bragged about the incident. Frank didn't ask for any of this information. Then, without thinking, Valcoro left the bar and immediately killed the man who raped his wife. From this moment on, a good relationship between Frank and Valcoro began. 11 years later, Valcoro became a detective and took his son Chad to school. Valcoro is divorced from his wife, but he loves his child very much. Chad is a nerdy kid and is often bullied by other kids at school. After dropping off Chad, Valcoro met with his lawyer because he wanted increased rights to see his child. Currently, Valcoro's meetings with his son are limited, but Valcoro's lawyer said that it is possible that Chad is not Valcoro's son. But this man doesn't want to do a DNA test. For him, Chad is his son, whatever happens. Meanwhile, the mafia meets with a Russian businessman at Frank's casino. Frank is with his wife, Jordan, and his right-hand man, Black Churchman. Frank's bodyguard shows a newspaper that reports about the city of Vinci as the most corrupt city in Los Angeles. No one mentioned Frank's name, but he was worried and asked Black to contact Valcoro. Elsewhere, a detective from the city of Ventura, a seraph named Antigone Ani Bezarides, who will be called Ani, has just woken up. Last night, this girl had sex with her subordinates. Annie knew this was a mistake, so she immediately asked the young man to leave. Not long after, Ani and the police raided a house of prostitution. However, it turns out that this place is a licensed virtual sex service, so it is legal. In reality, Annie's purpose in ambushing this place was because she heard rumors that her sister, Athena Bezarides, worked there. Annie drags her sister away and tries to reprimand her. Even though this work is legal, it is a job that is not noble. Annie wants Athena to find another job. Meanwhile, a California traffic cop named Paul Woodrue was patrolling his area. He saw a reckless car driver, so he stopped her. It turned out that the car's driver was a problematic artist who didn't bring any papers. Because she didn't want to get into trouble, this artist offered to have sex with Paul. so that the girl wouldn't have to get a ticket, but Paul firmly refused. A few days later, Paul was called because the artist made news, as if Paul had asked to have sex with him so he wouldn't get a ticket. Paul's position became so bad that the police sentenced him for several weeks. In another place, Velcoro comes to the police station. Police Chief William Holloway and Lieutenant Kevin Burris called him because they told him that Ben Caspier, the city manager, had been missing for 2 days. Even though there will be an important meeting today, they asked Velcoro to check it out. Velcoro and another detective named Dixon went to Caspier's office and interrogated Caspier's secretary, Erica. The woman hadn't been working long, so she didn't know Caspier very well, but it was unusual for Caspier to disappear without telling her about it. Then they went to Caspier's house. The place was a mess. They could see from the decorations in the house that Caspier was an eccentric, even perverted person. But there, they found nothing. At the same time, Frank is at a party and a man named Orsip Agronov, who is a Russian businessman, meets him. They plan to combine $5 million of their money to buy land to build a high-speed train track. With Caspier missing, Frank provides information about a government project that will create a high-speed railway worth $68 billion US. The point is that with this information, they can buy land cheaply on this route, and the government will buy it at a high price. Meanwhile, Annie and other police met a farmer named Danny to give her a letter from the bank because they were in arrears on their debt. Danny was disappointed and said that if they wanted to do real police work, they should try to find her sister, Vera, who had disappeared. The last place Vera was seen was at a religious group, so they went to a hill, which was a place where many people meditated. It turns out that Annie's father, Eli Bezarides, is the leader of this group. The two police asked the janitor, and according to them, Vera had stopped working and moved to a place like a club. Annie meets her father and asks about Vera. Her father was rarely there, so he only knew a little information about Vera. Velcoro was assigned to get rid of journalists who previously made news about the city's corruption, and as a corrupt police officer, of course, Velcoro obeyed this order. Not long after, Velcoro came to Chad's school to give him the tent he stole from the previous journalist. Because today wasn't Velcoro's day to meet Chad, he met Chad's adoptive father, who would pick him up. But Velcoro realized that he didn't wear the new shoes he bought for Chad. A child broke Chad's shoe, and Chad was afraid to tell Velcoro. Velcoro forces Chad to say who the person is, so Chad tells him. At night, Velcoro goes to the home of the child who bullied his son. Velcoro did not attack the child, but instead beat his father and let the boy look at him. Elsewhere, Paul returns home and meets his corny girlfriend. But Paul wanted to take a shower first. It turned out that Paul had to take strong medication because Paul had erection problems. Not long after, Paul returned and started having sex with his girlfriend. After they had sex, his girlfriend asked what wounds were on Paul's body. The man didn't want to talk about it and chose to go out to get some fresh air. Paul took his motorbike at high speed. Paul, who was stressed, turned off the lights, so he walked quickly in the dark of night. When filled with adrenaline, Paul wanted to die, but in the end, he gave up and pulled over. At this time, Paul saw a man sitting in the darkness. Paul approached the man and tried to call him, but was ignored. Paul realized that the person was dead, so he looked for the man's identity until he found out that this man was Caspier, whom Velcoro had been looking for. That night, Frank meets Velcoro at a bar. Velcoro gives him the file of the journalist he attacked earlier. It turns out that Frank paid Velcoro for all the tasks he had done. After Frank helped Velcoro look for his ex-wife's rapist, their relationship was quite close. Not long afterward, Velcoro was ordered to go to where Caspier was found. Paul, Ani, and several other police officers were already at the scene where Caspier was found. Not long after, Velcoro arrived and the inspection began. From the examination, Caspier's eyes were damaged by acid, he was tortured, and even his genitals were cut off. Caspier's body is wanted by 3 agencies, namely the Vinci Police Department, the Ventura City Sheriff, and the California State Police. The Vinci Police want Caspier's body because Caspier is a Vinci resident who is being sought because he was reported missing. The Ventura City sheriff wants Caspier's body because Caspier's body was found in Ventura City, while the California State Police wanted Caspier's body because he was an essential figure in exposing corruption in Vinci. What's more, the person who found Caspier's body was the state police, namely Paul. To assist the state police, through California Attorney General Richard Geldof and State Attorney Catherine Davis, asked Paul to join the team investigating the Caspier murder case. If he could provide information about corruption in Vinci, Paul was promised he would be appointed as a detective. Davis also asked Ani to join this investigation and uncover corruption at Vinci. After they enter, the person leading this investigation will be Ani, and Velcoro will be her deputy. Davis also reminded that Velcoro was a police officer whom the Mafia had bought. At the same time, the mayor of Vinci, Austin Chisani, asked Velcoro to handle the Caspier case and not let the state interfere with Vinci's problems. Then Velcoro met Frank and told him about Caspier's condition. Because Caspier was an important part of Frank's business, he thought someone was trying to attack him and made him alert. Then Frank met a man named Jacob McCandless, who was the director of a company called Catalyst. Frank and Orsip worked together to buy land on the high-speed rail line passing through Catalyst with Caspier's help, but it turned out that Caspier still needed to pay Catalyst. Because Caspier died, Frank's $5 million worth of money also disappeared. Frank has lost a lot of money, and his assets have been mortgaged. He refuses to give up and will return to the dark world he left long ago. Elsewhere, Annie and Velcoro meet the mayor of Austin. The last time Austin saw Caspier was a month ago at a party. Austin saw Caspier with a woman named Tasha. The next day, they went to headquarters. Paul and Dixon were waiting at that place. From Caspier's house, Annie finds several of Caspier's things are missing and can be searched for. Meanwhile, Paul showed Caspier's account history, which regularly withdrew $4,000 every month on dates when he had no events. Today was Velcoro's schedule to meet his son at school, but what he met was his ex-wife, Jana Brun. The woman didn't want Velcoro to meet Chad again because she knew that Velcoro was the one who attacked Chad's bully. Jana will file for full custody, and Velcoro won't let her. The next day, Ani and Velcoro went to a clinic where Caspier usually went. Apart from psychiatrists, this place also accepts plastic surgery. They met a doctor named Pitler, who was Caspier's regular psychologist. Pitler explained that Caspier had anxiety and guilt problems. He also liked young women and often hired them. This is what usually makes Caspier feel ashamed and hate himself. Pitler asks if Annie is Elliot's daughter since they have the same name. It turned out that Pitler had done research with a group called the Good People, led by Annie's father. Annie explained that she had 5 siblings, 2 of whom committed suicide, and 2 were imprisoned because the Good People was the wrong place. Frank meets Austin to pay a monthly bribe elsewhere, but he needs more money. Frank asks for time to collect more, while Austin gives him interest every time he underpays him. Meanwhile, Paul was at home with his girlfriend, Emily. Emily saw Paul's news with the artist beforehand. Paul denied the news and said goodbye because he would stay in Vinci temporarily to investigate the Caspier case. Meanwhile, Frank goes to a club owned by Mexicans. He meets someone to find information. Has anyone seen Caspier? A prostitute said that she remembered Caspier and had been taken to Caspier's secret house. Caspier did not have sex with this prostitute because Caspier only wanted to see her. Then, Frank meets Velcoro at the bar where they usually meet. Frank gives Velcoro the address of Caspier's secret house, so Frank goes to check it out. Not long after, Velcoro arrived at the hidden house. He entered the house and heard the sound of music playing. Velcoro entered the house carefully until he could see a lot of blood spilled on the floor. There is a rope hanging, a camera, and a hard disk. But suddenly, someone shot him with a shotgun, causing Velcoro to fall. But he still managed to see that the person who shot him was wearing a crow mask. The next day, Velcoro woke up. He was still alive because the only weapon used was a shoot gun that fired rubber bullets. Not long after, the police filled this place and Annie came. Even though a rubber bullet shot, Velcoro still hurt, especially since his ribs were broken. Paul and Dixon joined the investigation and obtained Caspier's call records. In the evening, Frank and Velcoro meet again at the bar. Velcoro asks anyone who knows Caspier's secret house, because someone was waiting for him. Velcoro wants to know what Frank's relationship with Caspier is, or whether he doesn't want to sacrifice his safety anymore. Frank explained that the plan was for him and Orsip to work together to buy cheap land, which would then be sold at a high price to the government. Frank was going to sell his business for $5 million, but the money was lost because Caspier was murdered. The catalyst has not yet received the money, so he is currently short of cash. Velcoro said that the person who shot him took a camera and a hard disk. Perhaps the hard disk contained important information. Meanwhile, Ani and Paul went to Austin's house, but the person who greeted them was Veronica Sassani, Austin's new wife. This place is a mess, and they ask if Veronica knows Caspier. Veronica answered that she had only seen Caspier once at a party. The two detectives went to Austin's house, because Caspier often called this house. Not long after, Austin's son, Tony Sassani, met them. They asked if Tony knew Caspier, and he answered that Caspier had just worked for his father. Then they checked Caspier's belongings at the bank, which contained several certificates and blue diamonds. Andy told all this information to Davis. Caspier had close ties to the catalyst and owned a great deal of land at the high-speed rail site. Elsewhere, Velcoro also told what he knew so far. Velcoro didn't know about the blue diamond. However, Ani and Paul don't know about the hard disk in Caspier's secret house. Elsewhere, Paul and his old friend, Miguel, are watching motorbike racing. They were colleagues while working for a private security team called Black Mountain. When they were colleagues, they had a special relationship. Paul wanted to forget his past, so he chose to leave. However, without realizing it, Dixon saw all this. The next day, from a traffic camera, they saw a car near where Caspier's body had been found. The car was registered to the transportation division of a film studio. Then Ani and Velcoro went to the film studio. In that place, people were busy making films. It turns out that this studio lost the car a week ago, and it hasn't been found, but a week before that, a driver left work due to family problems. Velcoro also asked a photographer if he had seen Caspier. The worker said he remembered Caspier as an important person in this company. The young man said he had heard Caspier say he was going to a necessary party full of women. They also met Caspier's secretary, Erica. The girl came to get a copy of the company's tax form. Elsewhere, Black meets Frank in a panic. Black tells him that one of Frank's men died horribly in conditions similar to Caspier's death. Black thinks that someone might be targeting Frank. Meanwhile, Paul was assigned to look for information in the prostitution area. One of the gigolos there said that he had met Caspier several times at a club. The gigolo explained that Caspier liked European prostitutes who had high prices. Paul enters the club further and meets Frank, who was also there. After that, Paul received information from another gigolo that Caspier liked watching other people have sex. The prostitute that Caspier often hires is named Tasha, who is one of the elite prostitutes for the party. Frank thought that one of the club's management was the person targeting him, but of course, they denied it. This club used to belong to Frank before being sold to a Mexican gang, but they didn't like Frank bossing them around. To solve the problem, Frank challenges a Mexican gang leader to a fight. In a short time, Frank was able to defeat him and take over the club again. Elsewhere, Ani and Velcoro meet a driver who has left the film company. It turned out that he had gone out to care for his sick mother, and at the same time, suddenly, an explosion occurred, a car was set on fire, and the car was a car stolen from a film company. A mysterious man with a mask runs away. The detectives suspect he is the perpetrator who blew up their car, so they chase him, but this man manages to escape. The next day, Paul woke up in a house. It turned out that the house belonged to Miguel. It turns out that last night they had sex, but Paul doesn't remember it. Paul didn't like the act anyway, so he left. However, his motorbike disappeared when he arrived near the hotel, making him frustrated. When he was about to enter the hotel, journalists were waiting for him to ask for news about the accusations with previous artists, so Paul chose to leave. Luckily, Velcoro wanted to come pick him up to go to work. Meanwhile, Frank is at a cake shop that is a Mexican drug cartel. Now that Frank has taken over his old club, he wants them to supply drugs to his new club. Then Frank went to a rental house that was rented to Mexicans who worked nearby. Even though this place also belonged to Frank, it had been sold. Because Frank needed money, he offered to help with security at this place, and the person who now managed the place couldn't refuse. Their relationship soured the night Paul met Emily after Paul was assigned to Vinci. However, Emily meets him to tell him that she is pregnant. Emily did not ask Paul to be responsible, but she also would not have an abortion. Of course, Paul is very happy with this news and thinks they should get married. The next day, Velcoro and Annie met Annie's father and asked him if he knew Caspier's psychiatrist, Pittler. Elliot remembers it. He once lived at the mayor of Austin's father's house, and Elliot shows a photo of him when he was young. Pittler and Austin were present in the photo, but Elliot didn't know them very well. Then they went to a place that Caspier often visited, an environmental observer, explaining that initially this area was agricultural. However, the waste thrown away by Frank's company has made the land and water in this area bad for growing crops. Farmers have been selling this land for a long time at cheap prices, and it will later be used as a high-speed rail line. Meanwhile, Paul and Dixon look for Caspier's stolen items at the pawn shop. They managed to find Caspier's watch. The pawn shop owner said that the person who pawned this watch was a woman. In another place, Annie was called to her office, and it turned out that her subordinates who had had contact with her had complained as if Annie had forced her to have sex. The boss decides that Annie must take part in a seminar, but Annie has to go to Vinci to attend a meeting on the Caspier case. Paul explains that the woman who pawned Caspier's watch was a prostitute named Irina Rolfo. It turns out the girl belonged to a drug dealer named Ledo Amarilla. From Caspier watches, there are prints of Caspier, Irina, and Ledo. This makes Ledo the main suspect in Caspier's murder. At night, Velcoro tells Frank that Caspier's possible killer is Ledo. Frank offers Velcoro to work full-time for him and stop being a police officer, but Velcoro refuses. The next day, the Vinci police prepared to ambush the Ledo area with full equipment. Suddenly, they were attacked by a gang. Several police officers died, and a shootout broke out between them. The police even shot at the building, which was a drug lab. There was a large explosion on one of the floors of the building, causing many victims to fall on both sides. Dixon was shot dead while gunfire was still going on. Ledo runs away while Annie and the others chase him. They hit a bus, so they fought back and shot at civilians who were demonstrating. The result of this shootout was that Ledo died, and only Annie, Velcoro, and Paul survived. With Ledo's death, the Caspier murder case was closed and Ledo was confirmed as the murderer. After that, Velcoro chose to leave the police and work full-time as a security officer for Frank. One of his duties is collecting rent for people in arrears, but Velcoro is a good person, so he can't say harsh things to others. Meanwhile, Annie attended a seminar for police who were reported to have committed sexual harassment at work. Then Paul was appointed a state detective in the insurance fraud section. That night, Frank is at his bar. The drug cartel supplying him wants to make a deal with him, but he turns them down. On the other hand, Velcoro and his ex-wife are in mediation to discuss custody of Chad, whom Velcoro's ex-wife wants to own fully. Jenna wants to do a DNA test on Chad. If it turns out that Velcoro is not Chad's biological father, this could result in Chad's full custody rights falling on him. Annie meets Danny, someone who asks Annie to look for her sister Vera, who disappeared at the start of the series. Annie received the photo at her old address. The photo was a secret photo from a party, one of which was a photo of a blue diamond. The photos contain many rich, powerful people. In another place, Frank assigns Velcoro to follow Black. He saw Black with the mayor's son, Tony, at his house. Not long after, Pittler came with several women. Velcoro followed him, and it turned out that Black had taken the women to meet Orsip, who welcomed them warmly. Not long after, Velcoro and Annie met at the bar. Annie shows a photo she recently got. There are many important people, including Caspier. So they came to the conclusion that Ledo was not Caspier's killer, but they couldn't do anything because Caspier's case was closed. However, Annie wants to find Vera, who has disappeared. The next day, the state's attorney, Davis, gathered Velcoro, Annie, and Paul. She said that the state attorney general was running for governor. After the Caspier case was closed, this was proof that the attorney general was in collusion and that Davis wanted them to look into the matter. Velcoro isn't a cop anymore, so he refuses. However, Davis promised he could help Velcoro get custody of his child, so Velcoro agreed. Apart from that, Davis also informed that the rapist of Velcoro's wife had been arrested several weeks ago after committing another rape. The man's DNA matched the DNA at the location where Velcoro's ex-wife was attacked. Now Velcoro realizes that he has killed the wrong person. The other side, Frank meets Catalyst director McCandles. Frank wants to return to the circle of high-speed rail land buyers, even though the money is gone from Caspier. McCandles says he can give Frank a place if he finds Caspier's missing hard disk. Meanwhile, Velcoro meets Pittler in his office. Velcoro knows that Pittler, Tony, Orsip, and Black are working together to smuggle European women into prostitution. Velcoro even knows that Pittler's job is to operate on their plastic, so they meet elite party standards. Pittler denies it, but Velcoro doesn't care and starts beating him. Finally, Pittler admitted that he was only in charge of performing plastic surgery for sex parties for elite people. He said that Caspier and Tony were the ones who worked together to hold these sex parties and take photos to blackmail rich people for their interests. The missing hard disk contains many photos that will be used to blackmail rich people, which is why McCandles wants Frank to look for them. Elsewhere, Annie was with her sister Athena. The girl said that she had once received an offer to take part in the sex party, but she turned it down. Annie begs Athena to include Ani in the party to look for Vera. Meanwhile, Paul goes to a jewelry store to look for Caspier's missing blue diamond. A jewelry shop owner explained that diamonds were expensive and would be difficult to sell. The shop owner also said that Dixon had come to his shop looking for the jewel. Annie picks up Paul, and he explains that Dixon is looking for this diamond before they find out that Caspier has this blue diamond in his safe. They need clarification on Dixon's involvement. Then they went to a house in the middle of the forest because Vera had last called her sister from the landline there, but after they searched for a while, they found no one in the house. Around the house, there was a hut. Inside the hut, they saw a chair covered in blood that had been drying for a long time, and it seemed like this was the place where Caspier was tortured and killed. Elsewhere, Velcoro is meeting his ex-wife. It turns out that, at first, their relationship was very good, but everything changed after Velcoro killed the person he thought was his ex-wife's rapist. Only Velcoro knows about this murder incident, so now his ex-wife thinks that Velcoro lied to calm her down, and because of this, their marriage ended in intrigue. After that, Velcoro met Frank at his house to ask if Frank knew that his information about the person who raped Gina was wrong. Frank replied that all he did was want to help him. Frank explained that he had gotten the name from someone else. Because of this mistake, Velcoro lost his marriage. Frank confirmed that he never had such intentions because he only wanted to help Velcoro. In the end, Velcoro believed him because even though Frank was a mafia, this problem was not something Frank would play around with. Velcoro tells Frank that Black is in the women's business with Tony and Orsip behind him because Velcoro knows that Frank never attended the parties attended by rich people. In another place, Paul is still looking for information about the Caspier blue diamond from the insurance company, explaining that the blue diamond was stolen during riots in Los Angeles in 1992. Meanwhile, the police who handled this case explained that the husband and wife who owned the diamond were murdered and left behind their two children, Leonard and Laura. The diamond robber was never found, and the CCTV camera footage also disappeared. Velcoro is spending time with his children, but Chad's mother asks for government supervision, which makes them uncomfortable. Chad's mother, Gina, told him Chad would see his father less often, and Chad didn't like it. Velcoro explains to his son that whatever Chad hears, he is Velcoro's son, and Velcoro promises he will always love him. After the meeting was over, in the evening, Velcoro returned to using drugs after stopping for a long time. Velcoro was very stressed, but he became sadder and emptier in the end. Not long afterward, he called his ex-wife. Velcoro said he was willing to give his ex-wife full custody of their child as long as he didn't do a DNA test. Velcoro and his ex-wife have black hair, while Chad has red hair, so likely Chad isn't Velcoro's son, but he never wants to know that. Frank interrogates Lado's dead men. Frank wants to know where Irina is, because maybe Irina has the hard disk that McCandless is looking for. After torturing the man, Frank got the information at night. Meanwhile, in another place, Ani would sneak into the party as a prostitute with other women. Velcoro and Paul will guard from outside. In the bar, Annie and other women were given drugs sprayed in their mouths. It turns out this place is filled with perverted rich men waiting for them. In another place, Frank calls Irina and wants to meet her, but the girl refuses. Irina explained that the person who gave her Caspier's watch and asked her to pawn it was a thin, white male police officer. Frank wants to meet to show a picture of who the man who gave him the watch is, and he will give her the money, so Irina agrees. But when they met, Irina had been killed by a Mexican gang. This is because Irina communicated with the police, and this gang was the gang whose products Frank rejected. Because the effects of the drugs were starting to take effect, Ani started to get dizzy, while the perverted man began to tease her. Luckily, Annie brought a knife to protect herself. Annie went to the bathroom to remove the drugs she had taken, but while there, Annie saw Vera, who was drunk. Annie tries to take Vera out, but the previous man stops her, so she is forced to kill the guard. Elsewhere, Velcoro and Paul sneak into the house and take the McCandless' valuable files. Then, Ani and Vera joined them. Luckily, they managed to escape from that place. Once they were safe, Velcoro and Paul read their stolen files. The files show the names of wealthy people who bought Caspier's shares at low prices and distributed them. At the same time, Paul received a message showing a photo of him having sex with Miguel, making him even more annoyed. The next day, Paul took Emily and his mother to stay at a motel for a few days to keep them safe. Paul is going away for a few days to sort things out. Meanwhile, Velcoro meets Frank and tells him what he found at the rich people's party. He concluded that from the start, these people had planned to get rid of Frank, and even his right-hand man, Black, also betrayed him. Frank also said Irina got Caspier's watch from a skinny white policeman. Velcoro immediately asks Paul to check where Holloway worked in 1992. Elsewhere, Ani shows Vera the photo she sent to her sister, and it turns out this photo is not her but belongs to Tasha, Caspier's favorite prostitute. Tasha sent the photo to Vera as a backup to blackmail rich people. However, the guard found Tasha's camera and took it to a hut near Ville, meaning that the blood in the hut that Annie found was not Caspier's blood but Tasha's. Paul looks for information about Holloway in '92. It turns out that Holloway, Burris, and Dixon were police officers in Los Angeles in '92, the same year and city where the Blue Diamond robbery occurred. At the time, Caspier was a police accountant. Frank calls Black to his room elsewhere, and now he knows that Black betrayed him. It turns out that the person who killed Frank's subordinate, Stain, was Black, but Black made it seem like he was killed by the same person as the person who killed Caspier to eliminate traces. It turns out that Stain was following Black because he was suspicious. After discovering that Black had betrayed Frank, the man tried to blackmail Black. That's why Black killed Stain. Frank still attacks Black, even though he has explained everything. This man explained that Caspier and Orsip planned to deceive Frank from the start, but Black didn't know who killed Caspier. It was at this time that Black admitted that the person who had provided false information about the perpetrator who raped Velcoro's wife was himself. Black intended to give him the fake name to make him look useful in Frank's eyes. Black told Catalyst that Orsip would buy Caspier's shares worth $12 million. Apart from that, Orsip also bought Frank's casino because Frank had failed to pay the bank. On the other place, Velcoro meets Davis to give McCandless files. However, it turned out that Davis had been murdered, so he quickly left that place and returned to Frank's place. Frank's men have been bought off except for his confidant Nels. Jordan meets Frank, and Frank tells her that he doesn't have anything anymore. Frank wanted Jordan to go first, and he would follow. Frank meets a diamond seller to make a diamond transaction, so he doesn't have to carry a lot of money. When he was leaving, he also bought tickets to Venezuela, and then he went to the drug cartel he was working with to make passports for him and his wife. Frank also bought many guns because he had a plan. Meanwhile, Paul, Velcoro, and Annie hang out in another place. Now, Annie and Velcoro are wanted by the police because they are accused of killing Davis. Paul said that in '92, Burris, Dixon, Holloway, and Caspier worked together to steal diamonds, then moved on to Vinci. The Lido gang's attack was deliberate to kill Dixon. They suspect that the people who killed Caspier were Burris and Holloway, who wanted this blue diamond for the two of them. At the same time, Paul receives a threatening photo, and the person asks him to meet tonight. At his casino, Orsett met Frank, and he boldly told him that Frank's casino and club were now his. Hearing this, Frank didn't do anything to Orsett. Meanwhile, Paul went to his meeting place and finally met Miguel. Turns out Miguel still works for Black Mountain, which only works for Catalyst. Miguel takes Paul to meet Holloway, Burris, and some Black Mountain troops. Holloway knows that Paul has files on the land he and Velcoro stole. Paul fights back and takes Holloway hostage to escape. Then Paul escapes without killing Holloway. Paul was able to kill the people who targeted him one by one. He even managed to kill Miguel, who kept trapping him. But before he could escape, Burris shot him and killed him. Elsewhere, from one of the photos taken by Tasha, Ani and Velcoro recognized someone. Vera said this woman was called Laura, while Velcoro remembered that the woman in the photo was Erica, Caspier's secretary. She is one of the children of a diamond robbery victim named Laura and her older brother Leonard. Meanwhile, Frank tells the casino manager that there is a gas leak in the AC and he has to vacate the casino, which is full. Frank took all the cash, blamed it on gas, and let it burn, then left the place. Then he was in his club, just like his casino, and after emptying his club, he let his club burn on purpose. The next day, Frank bought a ticket for his wife and wanted to go first to Venezuela so that Frank would follow her. However, Jordan loves Frank sincerely and doesn't care about his situation, so she doesn't want to leave Frank. But Frank also really loves Jordan and manages to persuade her to leave first. Meanwhile, Burris calls Velcoro and plans to make Velcoro the scapegoat for Paul's death. But Velcoro answered that he knew that Burris was part of the diamond robbery in '92 to threaten him. After that, Frank went to Austin's house to kill him, but there he saw Austin drowning in his swimming pool. Frank thinks the person who killed Austin was Tony, his son. Meanwhile, Ani and Velcoro go to Laura or Erica's house. Velcoro saw the crow mask worn by the person who shot him. They immediately forced their way in and saw a shotgun, a camera, and a photo of the person who robbed the diamonds in '92. Apart from that, they saw Laura tied up. After freeing her, Laura explained that after they had become orphans, they were sent to an orphanage. A family adopted Laura, while her older brother Leonard was still in an orphanage. When she was 16, Laura ran away and lived on the streets. That's when she met Caspier from Tasha, who took her to an orgy. Previously, Tasha told her about the blue diamond, and Laura remembered that Caspier was one of the robbers and killers of her parents. Laura changes her name and hair and gets Caspier to hire her. Laura checks Caspier's things and makes him unconscious, and then Leonard tortures Caspier to find out who killed their parents. Caspier told him everything, but Leonard got angry and accidentally killed Caspier. The reason why Leonard handcuffed her was that Laura planned to stop her brother. Because Leonard plans to meet Holloway to exchange Caspier's hard disk for their parents' diamonds, this hard disk contains important information. However, because they don't know the password, they make the hard disk delete the files. So now the hard disk is empty, and Velcoro knows that Leonard is planning to kill Holloway. At another place, Frank comes to the bar where he usually meets Velcoro. Frank is carrying a heavy weapon he just bought and waiting for Velcoro. Meanwhile, Velcoro is at the airport. Because Leonard was going to meet Holloway there, Velcoro managed to find him because he was the photographer he met on the film set. Velcoro knew that Leonard was angry and wanted to help him. Not long after, Holloway and Burris came to meet Leonard. However, Velcoro changed positions with Leonard to carry out this transaction while Leonard sat behind them. Holloway also gave him the blue diamond. Velcoro asked, why didn't they just steal the diamond and kill the owner? Holloway answered that Caspier and the wife of the diamond owner were having an affair. It turned out that Leonard and Laura were Caspier's children. This fact makes Leonard angry, and he attacks Holloway. Immediately, there was gunfire, and the atmosphere became very chaotic at the airport, and Burris used this chance to escape. Annie comes and takes Velcoro away, while Holloway and Leonard die. Not long after, Velcoro and Annie went to the bar where Frank was waiting. Frank also plans to send Velcoro and Annie to Venezuela with his wife. Velcoro can't go to Venezuela now, but still needs money. While he doesn't have access to a bank, Frank can give him money if Velcoro is willing to help him. Velcoro and Annie now have a special relationship, but Frank is right. Even though they are leaving, they still need money. Apart from that, Velcoro also owes Paul his revenge. That night, Frank and Velcoro attack the cabin where Orsip is hiding. They shot tear gas inside so people would come out, and they just had to shoot outside. There, Frank succeeded in killing McCandles and Orsip. They brought $12 million of Orsip money, which would be given to Catalyst. Once safe enough, they separated using different cars. When morning arrived, Velcoro called Annie, went to the ship first because he had business. Velcoro went to his son's school to see him one last time. But Velcoro couldn't help talking to him after seeing him and chose to leave. When he returned to his car, Velcoro saw a GPS tracker attached to his car. He realized that people were waiting for him, and now he's been caught, so he can't let go because of the GPS. Velcoro called Annie to go first, and he would follow. Velcoro doesn't want to bring the person who tracked him to Annie, so he had to find a way to free himself. At another place, while at a red light, several people attack Frank's car and take him somewhere. Frank is taken to the middle of the desert, where the Mexican gang that killed Irina is waiting for him. They took all of Frank's money, then killed him and left him in the middle of the desert. Meanwhile, Velcoro's car ran out of petrol, and he couldn't escape. Velcoro hides in the forest with his gun. The ones chasing him were Burris and the Black Mountain troops. It turned out that Velcoro could be killed easily by them, even though he tried to fight back. Meanwhile, Annie is already on a ship bound for Venezuela, while Velcoro's ex-wife receives Chad's DNA results, which state that the boy is indeed Velcoro's biological child. Time passes, Tony is appointed as Vinci's new mayor, replacing the father he killed. Meanwhile, Paul's name was used as the name of a street in California to commemorate his services. Geldof became governor and started a high-speed rail project in California. While Annie and Jordan have lived in Venezuela for several years, Annie also gave birth to Velcoro's child and cares for him with Frank's wife, Jordan. The second season doesn't have a happy ending, and that's how the series ends. This season is sadder than the first season. What do you think, everyone? True Detective Season 3 tells the story of the kidnapping of two small children. One of the children was found dead, so the police assumed that the other child had also died. However, 10 years later, the child's fingerprints were found, so the case was reopened. It took 35 years to finish this case. What happened? Who was the perpetrator who kidnapped them? And how do the detectives solve this complicated case? Previously, we will explain that this series has 3 timelines, that's 1980, 1990, and 2015, with the same characters. The series is told alternately, but the admin will explain it sequentially from 1980 to make it easier to understand. In 1980, in the afternoon, in a small town in America, 2 children who were siblings, named Will Purell and his sister Julie Purell, asked their father's permission to go to the park to see their friend's new dog. Their father, Tom Purcell, gave permission as long as they returned home before dark. They immediately went by bicycle. On the way, they saw several children playing, and several neighbors also saw them cycling to the park. Then they passed a man carrying a lot of rubbish, and 3 teenagers watching them inside the car. Time passed. It was already evening, but Tom was still waiting for his 2 children to come home. Because he was worried, he called his son's friend, who had a new dog, but they never made an appointment to meet today. Tom started panicking and immediately searched his neighborhood with his car. In the park, he saw many teenagers playing. One teenager was also playing with a bicycle that looked like Will's. Tom also saw the man who collected the trash earlier. Elsewhere, two state detectives named Wayne and Roland are on patrol. They received orders to go to Tom's house because Tom had reported to the police that his children had disappeared. When they arrived, the house was filled with police. Tom explained that his two children should have gone home, but were not at home. Wayne knew that something was strange. Tom's wife had not come home, but he was sure his children were not with their mother. Wayne wants to check the house, but Tom needs clarification because he thinks they should look for his children and not wait. Tom started to panic, but Wayne managed to persuade him by saying that maybe there were clues to where the children were now in the house. After that, Tom let them in and saw that the house was messy. Will and Julie have separate rooms, but Tom and his wife haven't slept in the same room for a long time. Wayne and Roland checked Julie's room first. Roland thought that maybe Tom's wife took their child away because they were separated even though they were not divorced. Wayne could only hope that was actually what happened. From Julie's room, they didn't find anything. Not long after, Tom's wife, Lucy, appeared in a panic because she just heard that her children had disappeared. This made the theory that Lucy was carrying her child immediately refuted. There wasn't much they could do other than wait for the police to search and question their neighbors. While waiting, Wayne checked Will's room. From under the bed, he found several Playboy magazines, and from the wardrobe, Wayne found powder on the floor. This powder comes from a small hole that leads to Julie's room. They asked Tom for the magazine, but Tom answered that it wasn't his. They continued their investigation by asking several neighbors. Some saw Will and Julie, but several neighbors saw teenagers in a VW car watching the children. Usually, teenagers hang out in the park, and the car belongs to a teenager named Freddie. Apart from that, residents also regularly see suspicious trash scavengers roaming around. Finding no useful information, they returned to Tom's house. Roland asked, "Since when have they been separated?" Tom answered that they had been separated for 6 months last season. They also shared that the cousin, Dan, had stayed for a few weeks. Dan was like an uncle to Will and Julie. When Dan sleeps at their house, he sleeps in Will's room while Will sleeps on the sofa. The next day, the police were assisted by residents to look for Will and Julie, but they were still not found. Meanwhile, Roland and Wayne go to the children's school. They met a teacher named Amelia. They also went there to meet the teenager in the VW car. Previously, they speaking with a teenager named Freddie. He explained that afternoon, he and his two friends hung out in the park until evening. Freddie admitted that he saw Will and Julie on bicycles before he arrived at the park, but after that, he never saw them again. Then they asked one of Freddie's friends who also went to the park. Unlike Freddie, he admitted seeing Julie and Will in the park that afternoon. Many other children and teenagers were in the park, but he didn't know all of them. Then Wayne asks Amelia about Will. Amelia describes Will as a kind and quiet child. Wayne is attracted to Amelia because they are both black people. In the 80s, jobs like teaching and police were filled with white people, and they were used to getting racist behavior. After school, they went to the house of a suspicious trash collector. According to his work, his house was filled with rubbish, but the man was not there. However, they barged in. From the photo of the person, it can be seen that the man has a family and is also a former soldier who went to war. Then they decided to join a search team in the forest. Wayne, who had fought in Vietnam, had a great ability to track footprints. Wayne broke away and followed the trail he found. He followed the car tire tracks, which took him to a park with a tower. He climbed it, and on top of the tower, he saw many cigarette butts and liquor bottles. Then Wayne returned to following the trail he found and took it deeper into the forest. He managed to find Will's bicycle there. Not far from that place, he found a strange white doll. Wayne continues to follow the trail, which leads him to another white doll. Now he was at the mouth of a cave, and Wayne slowly entered it. There he found Will's body lying in a state of prayer. Wayne immediately called other police, but in this place, they only found Will's body. The autopsy results showed that Will was killed by a blunt object blow to his head, and his neck was broken, then taken to the cave. The only clue they have is a doll found near Will's body, so they immediately looked at several doll shops, but none sold them. They also met the previous trash collector named Brad. Brad admitted that he ran into Will and Julie that afternoon but never saw them again. Brad explained that he was a war veteran. After returning, he couldn't have a job, so he scavenged rubbish to sell. He also has 2 children, but has divorced his wife. There was no proof that Brad was the perpetrator, so they couldn't do anything. Not long after, the police held a press conference. The police chief told residents and journalists to look after their children. Until now, Julie has not been found, but with the hope that Julie is still alive, the police have not stopped looking for her. After this meeting, they met Amelia and asked if she had seen the doll found near Will's body. Amelia doesn't know about this doll, but will ask other school children about it. The next day, the funeral will immediately take place. Wayne and Roland come to Tom's house. They met Lucy's cousin, Dan O'Brien, who admitted that the previous Playboy magazine belonged to him. According to him, Will and Julie are good children, but they are quiet children. Apart from that, Dan only provides useful information. Elsewhere, Amelia asks the kids about the picture Wayne gave them. One of them is a boy named Mike. Mike is the child Julie met while cycling on the day of the incident. Mike remembered the doll because someone gave it away on Halloween. Julie also got the doll when they went trick-or-treating together. Mike was very close to Julie, so he was very sad. Amelia takes Mike to meet Roland and Wayne. Mike explains that he doesn't know where Julie got the doll. He saw the doll after they finished trick-or-treating. Mike meets Julie and will halfway through trick-or-treating. Mike sees Julie talking to 2 adults. Mike doesn't know who they are because they wear ghost costumes at night. Roland is called to an adult club because the owner has information. He explained that a man named Ted had been looking for young women among his prostitutes. Ted was only released from prison last year for raping a minor. Maybe Ted was the perpetrator of Julie's kidnapping. Meanwhile, Wayne meets Amelia at a bar. It can be seen that their relationship is improving, and they are attracted to each other. Not long after, they saw the news on TV, and the police chief explained that there was a possibility that Julie would be approached by her kidnapper on Halloween. Wayne didn't like the police chief spreading this information because it would make the public panics. The next day, no parents let their children go to school alone. Roland and Wayne meet the man named Ted, who was told beforehand. They take Ted to an abandoned house. Ted denies that he was the perpetrator of Julie's kidnapping. They beat Ted, but Ted still denies it. From the landlord, Ted explained that Ted was not at home the night the kidnapping occurred. Ted answered that he was out that night. They go to daycare. Turns out Ted works there. They explained that on the date of the kidnapping, Ted was there helping until evening. Now Ted has an alibi that he may not have been the perpetrator of Julie and Will's kidnapping. Not long afterward, they were called to Tom's house. This is because Tom received a letter saying not to worry. The letter said Julie is fine. Kids should smile, not look for it, and just let it go, Julie. The next day, Roland and Wayne meet the child, who is playing with Will and Julie that evening. It turned out that they weren't very close and didn't have an appointment to meet that day, but the 2 children often told Tom they played together. But it turns out that Will and Julie were lying. They returned to Tom's house and told him that Will and Julie had been lying while playing with other children all this time, but they didn't understand why Will and Julie had to lie. Wayne and Roland checked Will's room again. This time, Wayne found many small letters from Julie's room and took them as evidence. Wayne and Roland brought several items as evidence. Roland and Wayne came to the Hoyt Foods factory the next day. This is because Lucy worked at the bar before, and she worked there. They met with the factory manager. He explained that the company has a program to pay for treating sick employees' children. The manager made such a provision after losing his grandson many years ago. Since Lucy is a former employee, the company will also help her. The clues so far didn't lead them anywhere. The latest clues are a small letter in Julie's room and a picture of Julie's all-pink place. Volunteers and the local community were still searching for Julie the next day. Wayne and Amelia also often joined this search team. One day, while searching alone, Wayne finds some dice in the woods. Not far from that place, he found a bag filled with toys, and around there, he saw a sharp stone with blood stains. Not far from that location, there is a large house. Wayne called Roland and entered the house. The owner of this house is an old male farmer. This man often saw Will and Julie passing through his house towards the forest. Apart from them, he also saw white women and black men sometimes. He remembered it because the person's car was new and luxurious, which was still rare in this area. In another place, Brad is walking around as usual. Some people stopped him halfway. It turns out that they were local residents who didn't like Brad's presence. The parents are even more worried about the case that happened to Will and Julie. They wanted Brad not to approach children again while hitting them. The next day, Roland shows a photo of the toy Wayne found to Will and Julie's parents. They don't remember ever giving toys like that to their children. The detectives explained that the toys had Julie and Will's fingerprints on them, plus the prints of an unknown person. They suspected the children often played in the forest and kept the toys there. This means that there may be an adult they often see who bought them that toy. At the same time, Wayne goes through Tom's family photo album. He found a photo of Will in the same pose as when the boy's body was found. Tom explains that this photo is from Will's first Holy Communist when he was 10. Wayne and Roland immediately went to the church where Will took his first photo of the Holy Communists. The pastor explained that he often saw Julie and Will at church. Finally, the priest met Julie, and the girl said she was excited to meet her aunt. Wayne is confused because Julie doesn't have an aunt. Roland showed him a straw doll earlier, and the priest recognized the doll. From the priest, they learned that the person who made the doll was a woman named Patty. Then they went to see Patty. The woman was sure she made the doll, but she couldn't remember who had bought her doll. But she remembers a black man with one white eye buying 10 of her dolls. Not long after, they went to the black neighborhood to look for this man and asked residents. They arrived at a house, according to the description. The man who lived in the house had one white eye, and this man was named Whitehead. Wayne and Roland ask about Julie and Will, but Whitehead thinks they are trying to make him a scapegoat. Whitehead gathered residents so that Roland and Wayne were pressed, and wasn't much they could do, so Roland and Wayne chose to leave. In the evening, Roland came to a bar. He came because Tom had a problem. The bar is where Lucy works. Tom accuses Lucy's boss of having an affair with her. Roland came to the place to take Tom. Tom's mental condition is currently very chaotic because he doesn't know Julie's current condition. He felt very vulnerable because he couldn't do anything. The next day, Amelia came to Lucy's house to bring Will's things from school. Lucy invited Amelia in. Amelia tried to calm Lucy, although she could never understand what Lucy was experiencing. Lucy admitted that she had done something terrible, but she didn't explain what it was. Amelia advises Lucy to tell Wayne everything. Hearing this made Lucy angry, because she thought that Amelia had come because of Wayne's orders, so Lucy threw her out. Elsewhere, Brad is picking up trash as usual. He approached 2 children who were drinking canned drinks and asked for their cans after they had finished drinking. The children's father saw him and called his friends. Meanwhile, Wayne and Roland call Freddie to the police station because his fingerprints were found on Will's bike. Freddie was questioned about the fingerprints, but he denied that he was the person who killed Will. Freddie admitted that he bullied Will and took his bicycle, but when Will stole the bicycle, Will was not with Julie. Freddie chases Will into the forest to scare him, but he gets lost and never sees Will again. Brad was being hunted by residents, so Brad ran as fast as he could to his house, but it turned out that the hunters had also gone to his house. A former soldier, Brad, sets traps and prepares his weapons to defend himself. Roland and several police officers are called to Brad's house to calm him down. When someone broke into his house, an explosion occurred, and Brad started shooting at the people. Victims fell from both residents and the police. Wayne gets in, and Brad doesn't attack him. Brad doesn't want to go to prison, so he asks Wayne to kill him. He knew he would end up in prison for his actions. He pretended to attack Wayne, so he had to be killed. Because of that incident, Roland was injured in his leg, but his condition was stable and not in danger. A panicked Amelia goes to Wayne to calm her down. The next day, the police searched Brad's messy house. One of the cops finds Julie's burned clothes and Will's bag there. When Wayne is told about Will's bag and Julie's clothes, he is shocked and convinced there must be something wrong. The police chief wants to make Brad the killer of Will and Julie. They assumed that Julie was killed by burning, and so, in 1980, Will and Julie's case was closed, with the perpetrator of the murder being Brad. One day, Amelia wrote an article in the newspaper that said that the source explained that Julie and Will's case was far from over. Wayne knows nothing about this article. The police chief could advise Wayne to write a letter if he had nothing to do with this article, but this could damage his relationship with Amelia. If Wayne is unwilling, he will be demoted to administration or he can quit. Wayne chose to be demoted to the administration. Fast forward 10 years later, in 1990, Wayne was called to appear before two prosecutors to discuss the closed case of Will and Julie. Wayne is confused about why this case has been reopened 10 years later. Julie was reported to have died in 1980, but Julie's fingerprints were found in a pharmacy robbery, meaning that Julie was still alive. It means Brad was not the perpetrator of Will and Julie's murder, as Wayne suspected. Wayne returned home, and now he has two children. He is still with Amelia to this day. In the last 10 years, Amelia has written several books, one of which discusses the case of Julie and Will. Wayne tells Amelia that it turns out Julie is still alive. The next day, the same two prosecutors met Roland, now a lieutenant. Roland and Wayne are now in different jurisdictions. Roland tried to move Wayne to his place twice, but was blocked by the head office every time. One day, Amelia walked to the police station where the pharmacy robbery occurred. Amelia was working on her second book, an update on Will and Julie's case. She wants to update the book because there is a possibility that Julie is still alive. She admitted that her ex-husband was a former police officer, so she had this information. Amelia comes home happy in the evening because she has material for her new book. Amelia explained that Julie's fingerprints were found on the cosmetics shelf. It seemed that Julie had only gone there to shop and was not part of the robbery. The next day, Roland met Tom, and they have been good friends until now. Tom lives alone because Lucy has died. Tom is no longer an alcoholic and is slowly starting to move on from Julie. However, the discovery of Julie's fingerprints and the reopening of the case make Tom remember Julie again. In the evening, Roland and Wayne met at the bar after a long time. With the reopening of Julie and Will's case, Roland invited Wayne to join this investigation because they were the two people who understood this case the most. The next day, Roland shared a meeting of the investigation team for Julie and Will's case. The information so far is that the victim's mother died in Vegas due to an overdose, and Lucy's cousin, Dan O'Brien, is also unknown. Wayne said there is a possibility that some people don't like this case being reopened. Julie could have just escaped from her kidnapper, which means both the police and her kidnapper are seeking Julie. Roland and Wayne go to the police station in town. Julie's fingerprints were found. They checked the CCTV footage, but found nothing. Wayne didn't want to give up. He repeated the CCTV footage many times and finally felt that he had found Julie, who was now 21 years old. Of course, whether it was Julie is uncertain, but Wayne is sure that other police had provided information about Lucy in Vegas. At the same time, Dan was last seen in Vegas, but it was not found again. At the same time, Tom arrived because the police asked him to provide information. Looking at the photo from the CCTV camera, Tom could recognize that this woman was Julie. A few days later, because there was a possibility that Julie was still alive, Tom made a statement and asked if Julie had seen this news to contact the police. A man with information about Julie meets Roland and Wayne. He was a street child and lived in a street children's shelter. There he met Julie, but as he remembered, the girl's name was Marie July. He thought Julie was a little crazy because Julie didn't know what year it was. Julie also said that she was the princess from the Pink Room, and Julie was looking for her brother. Hearing this information, Wayne was sure the person described was the Julie they sought. One evening, Wayne and Amelia ate together at Roland and his girlfriend to get to know each other. Initially, their dinner went smoothly until Amelia discussed Julie's case. Wayne doesn't like Amelia discussing Julie's case as if Amelia is dancing on other people's suffering. When they returned home, an argument broke out between Wayne and Amelia, one of which was because Wayne heard that Amelia introduced Wayne as her ex-husband, which hurt Wayne's feelings. Amelia replied that she said that only to get the police to tell her information about Julie. Wayne thinks that Amelia is someone who takes advantage of other people. Their fight escalated but stopped after their child met them. The next day, Wayne examined Julie's case file more thoroughly. One piece of evidence that Brad is Will's killer is the discovery of Will's bag and Julie's clothes at Brad's house. Wayne realized that the bag and clothes had been deliberately kept there because they were found several days after the shootout. Not long after, the police received a call and recorded it. Tom is called to listen to the recording, which turns out to contain Julie's voice telling Tom not to try to look for her. Julie knows what Tom has done and doesn't want to see him again. Hearing this forced Roland to ask about the possibility that the perpetrator had been Tom all along. From the cupboard, there is a hole in Julie's room. This hole is enough for Julie to peek in. Tom never knew about the hole, and Tom insisted he was not the perpetrator of this murder. At Tom's workplace, his boss said that Tom was problematic and didn't get along with the other employees. One of the workers once saw Tom visiting a gay club. Wayne and Roland search in Tom's house. Roland finds a consultation sheet for homosexuals, which means Tom is probably gay. They meet the police, who find Will's bag at Brad's house. He explained that a police officer named Harrison said the bag belonged to him, who had stopped being a police officer and was working as head of security for Hoyt Food. They visited Hoyt Food to meet Harrison. The man explained that he found Will's bag on the second day. He also said that Tom often visited Brad's house after the shootout. Amelia went to several churches that usually accommodate street children. One of the teenagers recognized Julie from her group, and she also knew Julie as Marie July. She thought Julie was confused about herself. She once said Julie was the princess from the Pink Room. Elsewhere, Wayne receives a call wanting to meet with Roland. They go to a restaurant, and it turns out the person who wants to meet them is Dan. Dan meets them to get money with the information he has and explains that Lucy's death was a murder that was staged as an overdose. Some people don't want Roland and Wayne to get information about Julie, and the person who knows about Julie and Will is Lucy. That's why Lucy was killed. Dan didn't want to provide additional information before he could get money for this information. Elsewhere, Tom has been released because he was not proven to be the perpetrator of Will's murder and Julie's kidnapping. Accidentally, Tom heard from the detective that Roland told him they had just met Dan at night at a motel. Tom manages to find Dan before the police, and angry Tom attacks Dan and threatens him to give up the information he has. Dan tried to fight back, but Tom could easily turn the situation around. Tom thought the hole in Will's room was Dan's doing to peek at Julie, but Dan immediately denied it. Dan explained that after Lucy and Tom separated, he knew who was paying for Lucy's life until she was finally killed. The information Dan would give Roland was this person's name. After learning this information, Tom went to a house. He broke into the house and found a very thick iron door. He entered it and came to a long hallway that took him to a room filled with pink. At the same time, Harrison appeared from behind Tom with a face full of menace. The scene moves to Amelia sitting and reading her book about Will and Julie. After the reading session, a black man with a white left eye was there. The man was different from the whitehead that Roland and Wayne had met. The man said Amelia was using this case to make money as if dancing on other people's suffering. The next day, Wayne is called to the park by the police. From the tower, he found the body of Tom, who had been killed but made it look like he had committed suicide. In the evening, when Wayne arrives at his house, Amelia explains about the black man from before. Amelia thought that this person was the person Wayne had been looking for, namely, who bought many dolls. The next day, Amelia met Lucy's best friend to ask what she knew about Lucy's relationship with the black man with one eye. She didn't know anything, but there was a possibility that that person was Julie's kidnapper. This woman showed a photo of Will and Julie taken on Halloween in 1980. Behind them, there were two adults dressed as white ghosts. A farmer near the park once said that he often saw a pair of white women and black men outside. Mike also said that Julie met two adults dressed as ghosts on Halloween. Wayne and Roland check the motel where Dan is staying, but they can't find him there. In the evening, Wayne receives phone records for the last 3 weeks to the motel where Lucy died. Wayne checked on him overnight. The next day, Wayne met Roland. He showed a recording of the phone ringing several times one night, 2 days before Lucy overdosed. The phone number was owned by Hoyt Food Industry and was in Harrison's name. From the plane passenger records, there is also the name Harrison, who went to Vegas the day before Lucy's death. Wayne thinks that the person who killed Lucy was Harrison. After Harrison returned home from the factory in the evening, Wayne and Roland followed him. They stopped Harrison in the middle of the street, then dragged him and took him to an abandoned building. Harrison is beaten and asked if he killed Lucy and the person who kept Will's bag and Julie's clothes at Brad's house. Harrison still denied it, even though he continued to be tortured. Harrison had difficulty breathing at one point, so Wayne freed his bonds. Harrison tries to fight back and tries to kill Wayne, but Roland shoots him and Wayne shoots him too. They also buried Harrison's lifeless body in the middle of the forest. They started fighting because the person who proposed interrogating Harrison was Wayne, which made their relationship sour. When he came home, Wayne burned the clothes he had worn before. Amelia saw it, but Wayne didn't want to say anything. The next day, Wayne received a call from an unknown person. Wayne saw 2 cars threatening to come with him from outside the house. Wayne agreed and entered their car. The person who brought Wayne was Edward Hoyt, owner of Hoyt Food. They went into the forest because Edward wanted to talk to Wayne alone. Edward knew that Wayne had killed Harrison, even though Wayne denied it. Edward knew Harrison had nothing to do with Wayne, but he advised him not to continue this investigation. If not, then the Wayne family will be in danger. In the evening, Wayne and Amelia meet at the bar. Amelia wants them to be open about what happened, so Wayne explained everything. Julie's case was closed without clarity, and Wayne was forced to leave the police force. This openness made their relationship improve. 15 years later, in 2015, an elderly Wayne is conducting interviews for a documentary about Julie and Will's case. At that time, Amelia was dead, and the person who interviewed was Elisa. This interview was not done in a day. Elisa explained that a website discussed unsolved cases, one of which was Julie's case. Wayne has dementia. This makes Wayne often need to remember what he is doing. The next day, Wayne went to the office of his son, who was a police officer. Wayne goes to him to ask for old files on Julie's case. Wayne wants his son to find several people to question, including Roland, whom he last saw a long time ago. The next day, Wayne met Elisa at her apartment. Wayne will give her the information he knows, but he also wants Elisa to give him the information she has. Elisa shows a photo of Bones identified as Dan's, who disappeared in 1990. Elisa still has other information but wants to wait to show it. While accompanied by his son, Wayne went to Roland's house the next day. After all this time, Wayne doesn't remember the last time they met, especially since Wayne has dementia. Roland explained that the last time they met was after they killed Harrison 25 years ago. Wayne meets Roland and tells him that Lucy made the letter for magazine cuttings. Wayne knew this because, in Amelia's book, a quote from Lucy said that children should laugh, the same as what was written in the letter. The reason Lucy did it was to make Tom feel good. They can no longer ask Lucy because Lucy is dead. Wayne also apologized because he had never contacted Roland. They agreed to check Julie's case one last time. At night, Wayne also tells Roland that Will made the small letter found in Julie's room. The small hole between their rooms was not for peeking, but for sending the letter. The next day, Elisa tells Wayne that after Tom's death and the closure of Julie's case in the year 90, there is a black man with one eye who is still looking for Julie. This man introduced himself as Watt. Elisa explained that the white doll could be a symbol of a pedophile group. There is a possibility that Julie's case is connected to a group like this. They think that Lucy or Tom sold their child with Dan's help. But Wayne thought Julie's case had nothing to do with such things. Roland and Wayne meet the Hoyt family's former maid the next day. The woman explained that Edward Hoyt had one daughter named Isabel. Isabel's husband and daughter died in an accident. This accident devastated Isabel, someone who cared for her during her illness, and was a black man with one eye named Mr. June. The Hoyt house has a room where only Isabel and Mr. June can enter. In the evening, Wayne goes back through the file of photos of 2 adults at a Halloween party in the 90s. Wayne thinks the adults behind the costume might be Mr. June and Isabel. At the same time, they saw a sedan parked in front of Wayne's house. This car often appeared and made Wayne angry. Wayne was fed up, so he approached him with a baseball bat. The car ran away, but Roland had already gotten the car's license plate number. The next day, Wayne and Roland meet Harrison's wife. They asked if she had seen Harrison with a black man with one eye. She remembered that the man had come to her house a few days after Harrison disappeared. The man introduced himself as Junius. From the information, perhaps this black man with one eye was named Junius Watt. They go to the abandoned Hoyt family house, where they find no one, which is very messy. In the basement, they found a thick iron door. When they managed to enter the room behind the door, they saw a room filled with pink. This is the location where Harrison killed Tom. They believed that this place was where Julie had been held all this time, because Julie always said she was the princess of the pink room. The next day, from the information on the number of police cars that came to Wayne that night, they received information that the vehicle belonged to a man named Junius Watt. They went to his house, and Junius wasn't surprised. The man looked relieved. Inside the house, Junius explains that he has worked at the Hoyt Food Farm since it first opened. Junius was moved to manage Edward's house. Edward's wife died shortly after giving birth to Isabel, so Junius helped raise Isabel as if he were his child. After Isabel's husband and child died in an accident, Isabel was so sad that she experienced mental disorders. One night, Isabel sneaks out and has an accident. The officer in charge was Harrison, and since then, Harrison has helped him keep this case a secret. One day, at an employee picnic, Isabel saw Lucy carrying Julie. According to her, Julie is very similar to Isabel's child, Marie. Isabel and Junius met Lucy to let Julie play with Isabel, and in return, Isabel would pay Lucy for some time. Lucy and will often meet in the forest to play, but Isabel wants to adopt Julie completely. Isabel wants to take Julie, but Will tries to hold her back. Isabel pushed Will to the ground and accidentally hit Will's head on a sharp rock, and killing him. Junius says that Will is fine and just fell asleep. Junius moved him into the cave, and the one who made Will's hands position like praying was Julie, not knowing that her brother was dead. After the fight at Brad's house, Junius asks Harrison to store Julie's bag and clothes there. Harrison told Lucy about this incident and wanted Lucy not to tell anyone, but she was given a lot of money in exchange. Julie lived in the pink room for several years and had no problems. Even Julie started to think that her name was Marie July. It turns out that Isabel was putting medicine in Julie's drink all this time, so she was confused about who she was. When he finds out, Junius feels sorry for Julie. One night, on purpose, Junius didn't lock the door and gave Julie the address to his house, but Julie fled elsewhere. That same night, Isabel immediately committed suicide by overdosing on drugs. Junius continued to look for Julie until street children told her at a church. Roland and Wayne went to the church. A nun recognizes Julie as Marie July. The nun explained that when she came to the place, Julie was in a very bad condition and was infected with HIV. Half a year later, Julie died from the disease. Of course, with a heavy heart, Wayne and Roland regretted that they couldn't solve this case sooner, so it was too late to save Julie. When they were going home, they met a boy named Mike, whose father was a lawn mowing service provider who provided free services for the church. At this time, Mike already had a daughter named Lucy. In the evening, Wayne finally decided to read Amelia's book to the end. So far, Wayne has never finished Amelia's second book about Julie's case. In the book, Amelia describes Mike as a child who is very close to Julie. Mike's father worked as a lawn mowing service provider. Wayne saw Amelia's reflection. Amelia explained that Mike was continuing his father's job as a grass cutter, so he met Julie at church. They know each other, even though Julie doesn't even know herself. The nuns want to protect Julie from evil people who are looking for her by telling her that Julie is dead. This means that the little child named Lucy, whom they hit then, was Julie and Mike's child. After learning about this, Wayne looked for Mike's address and found him. However, after arriving in front of Julie's house, his dementia relapsed, and he didn't know why he was there. Confused, Wayne called his son to pick him up. But Wayne needed to find out where he was. So Wayne went down to see Julie, who was gardening with Lucy, to ask for the address. Julie, who he had been looking for, was in front of him, but Wayne didn't know why he was there. Julie tells where Wayne is, and then her son picks him up, and that's how the series ends. True Detective Season 4 beginning by showing the view in a small village called Ennis in Alaska, United States. A hunter is hunting a herd of reindeer. When the sun began to set, this herd of deer jumped off the cliffs simultaneously. Elsewhere, several scientists were resting at the scientific base of the Saul Research Institute. One of the scientists was making a video recording, but one of his colleagues standing behind him suddenly had a seizure. The man said that someone had woken up and the lights went out. After some time passed, a man was tasked with sending supplies to the base. Because that night will begin a long night that can last for 6 months. When this man arrived, no one greeted him. He entered this facility, but he could not find anyone there. The man accidentally dropped his keys, and when he took the keys under the table, he found a human tongue. Instantly, he was shocked. Not long afterward, the Ennis police chief, a woman named Denver, came to this facility with her police colleague Hank Pryor. There was another police officer there named Peter Pryor. He is Hank's son. Peter explains that the supply delivery man had previously reported to the police that there were no scientists on the premises and that a human tongue had been found. The Saul station has been operating for 18 years to research the geology and biology of the Arctic, as well as the impacts of climate change. The police checked the place, but they could not find anyone. However, a note they found on the blackboard said, "We are all dead." They found all the scientists' phones, meaning they didn't travel, because they won't leave their phones behind. From Denver's analysis of the clothes in the laundry and the food there, the scientists had been missing for at least 48 hours. The human tongue can also be seen changing color. The tongue also had signs of repetitive behavior. Such marks usually appear from licking threads when mending fishing nets, meaning the tongue belongs to natives. At another place, Rose is slaughtering her hunted wolf from a distance. She saw a man standing still, looking at her. Meanwhile, Denver arrives at her office, and a young trooper named Evangeline Navarro waits for her. She went there to ask about the tongue that Denver found. This is because Evangeline handled a murder case of a woman without a tongue 6 years ago, but was unable to solve it. Evangeline is obsessed with this case and was demoted from police to trooper. Not long after, Evangeline was called to a mental hospital where her sister was being treated. Evangeline was called because her sister was hysterical again. Evangeline's sister is a woman named Julie. Julie was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which made her often hallucinate. Their mother also experienced a similar condition and has died. Meanwhile, Peter was at home. He is married to a native named Kayla and has one child. Just as they are about to make love, Denver calls Peter. Kayla doesn't like Peter working too often, especially as a police officer. Denver asks Peter to bring the file for the murder of a woman named Annie Kautok 6 years ago at his father's house. For some reason, Hank brought the file home. Not long afterward, Peter came to his father's house. He said he wanted to take old photos to show his son, but that was just a cover because he wanted to take Annie's files to Denver. Rose saw the man she had seen before again. But this time, the man seemed to want to show something, and Rose followed him into the darkness. Meanwhile, Peter has arrived at Denver's house to give Annie's file to her. While there, Peter met a woman named Leah, Denver's adopted daughter. Denver explains that Annie's case is a murder that was discovered in the village 6 years ago. Evangeline was assigned to handle this case until she became obsessed. Annie's body was found without a tongue and had been stabbed 32 times until the wound was star-shaped. Annie is also an activist who often demonstrates that mining near the village pollutes the environment, especially the village's drinking water. This made Annie have many enemies, especially workers and mining owners. Half of the village's residents are workers at the mine, so you can imagine how many people hate Annie. Evangeline was obsessed with this case, to the point where she accused the workers, or mining owners, of being the perpetrators. However, because she harassed strong people too much, Evangeline's position was demoted to trooper. When that happened, Denver had not yet been assigned to this village. After Peter leaves, Denver checks in on the scientists from Saul Station and Annie's case. From one of the photos, she found that Annie was wearing the same jacket as one of the scientists. Denver concluded that these two cases are related. Elsewhere, Rose was still following the previous man into the dark ice. This man continued walking until suddenly he took a strange pose, then pointed in a direction because he wanted to show something. Denver goes to Salal because she thinks that the scientist's disappearance has something to do with Annie's murder. While there, she met Evangeline, who also had the same feeling. Evangeline pointed out that maybe Annie was wearing the same jacket as one of the scientists. This may be a clue, or it's just a coincidence. This scientist was named Raymond Clark, and while there, they were told that Rose had found the scientists quickly. The police immediately went to Rose's position. Evangeline asks how Rose found them. Rose answered, Travis pointed it out. Evangeline was confused when she heard Rose's words because, as far as she knew, Travis was dead. But for Arctic people, it is common to see dead people. The bodies of the scientists were found buried in ice, scared, and without clothes. Their eardrums were ruptured, and on the forehead of one of the scientists was a strange circular symbol. Not far from these scientists, their clothes were found as if they had deliberately taken off their clothes. Meanwhile, suddenly, one of the frozen scientists screamed. All of these scientists died except for the person who screamed earlier. Not long after, Denver goes to school to meet the high school biology teacher, Bryce. Denver meets him to ask if he knows what went wrong and what the Salal station did. Denver tells him that most of the scientists there have died. Bryce explained that only some people can enter and leave Salal station. They are researching microorganisms that have the potential to stop cell decay. If successful, they could heal many lives and even cure cancer. However, Farmer Frost is too harsh and will damage the cells of these microorganisms, so this research is impossible. Meanwhile, Evangeline is with Rose at her house. Evangeline asks since when did Rose see the spirit of a man named Travis? Seeing dead people is quite common in Ennis. When it's cold, we can have hallucinations that make us see things that aren't real. In severe cases, this can cause schizophrenia, as experienced by Evangeline's sister, Julie. When they were about to take Evangeline home, Rose explained that the circle symbol on the scientist's forehead was even more ancient than the ice in that place. Denver arrives at her office. Central Police Chief Ted Kennelly arrives to take the scientists' bodies to the center. Because the Ennis County Police Department doesn't have a forensics team, Denver refuses and wants to work on this case. To prevent Ted, Denver explained that according to regulations, frozen bodies could not be mutilated until they thawed at 38 degrees, or they would be useless in court. Denver uses an ice hockey rink to store the scientists' frozen corpse. Their bodies piled up as if they were being chased by something. Not long after, Evangeline met Denver. She showed a tattoo on Annie's body that was the same as the one found on one of the scientists' foreheads. Evangeline thinks that these cases are related, but Denver denies it. Denver is still trying to understand what these scientists have experienced so far. They know these scientists went out into the middle of the ice and then removed their clothes. Peter thinks a bear came into the station and made them run away. They took off their clothes because hypothermia made them unable to think rationally. As for the circle symbol on one of the scientists' foreheads, this could be a game if it was made before they left. If it was made after they left, someone was with them when they died. The problem was that the clothes found didn't match. There were only 5 clothes and 3 shoes. Their clothes were folded so neatly that their killer might have folded them, but nothing made sense. From one of the scientists' cell phones, they found footage at the beginning of the series showing Raymond convulsing before the power went out. Not long after, Peter met a man delivering food supplies to the Salal station. The man explained that he knew the scientists well because he often sent supplies there. He described Raymond as a strange person. One day he saw Raymond walking on the ice without clothes. When he found the tongue there, he thought he saw someone, but he wasn't sure whether it was real or not because, again, it was very normal to see dead people in Ennis. Peter asks about the circle tattoo on the scientist's corpse's forehead, and the man remembers that Raymond also has the same tattoo. Meanwhile, Denver meets the janitor with a contract to clean at Salal Station. They describe these scientists as quiet people, but they are very serious about their work. They didn't communicate with the scientists much, but they explained that Raymond was strange because he often locked himself in his room and wouldn't let the officers clean it. Not long after, Denver and Peter met after explaining the information they had just obtained. Peter also explained about one of the research institutes, a holding company called Tuttle United. Peter wants to go home immediately, but Denver asks him to keep the scientists' bodies at the hockey park. Denver goes to Peter's house to pick up Leah, who is friends with Kayla. Denver sees Leah tattooing natives with a marker, but Denver doesn't like it. Leah is curious about the culture, but Denver would prefer something else. Elsewhere, Peter receives a call from Denver telling him to check Raymond's credit history. Hank suddenly appears and slaps Peter, because he already knew that Peter had stolen Annie's file from him. Hank reminds Peter that he doesn't belong to Denver and doesn't have to obey Denver because he also has a family. Before long, Denver had Raymond's credit history. One day, Raymond paid to have a circle tattooed on his chest. Denver contacted the company that tattooed him. When he got the tattoo, Raymond came alone and cried after finishing the tattoo, not because of pain, but because of something more sentimental. Then, Denver went to Evangeline's house to tell her that Raymond had gotten the same tattoo as Annie 4 days after her death. From the photo, it can be seen that Raymond and Annie have a special relationship. DNA results also confirmed that the tongue found at Solo Station was Annie's tongue, which had been preserved for 6 years, because these two cases are related. Denver wants them to work together to discover that Raymond and Annie are now related. Evangeline and Denver go to a park where Raymond parked his trailer. They saw some animal bones, and there were also many strange pictures and objects hanging around. There was even Annie's cell phone there. Above the trailer is the same large circle symbol with a doll made to resemble Annie, as if it were a place to perform a ritual. At the same time, Peter called them. Denver comes to Peter's place and tells her there are only 6 scientists, apart from the people still alive. Among these frozen people, there is no Raymond, which means there is a possibility that he is still alive. Quickly, Evangeline and Hank gather troopers to search for Raymond, who was the main suspect in all these murders. Denver asks Peter to open Annie's cell phone elsewhere because there might be important data on it. Peter asks what happened in Denver and Evangeline's last case when they used to work together. She was curious why their relationship had deteriorated. Denver explained that there was a murder-suicide case committed by a person named Wheeler. The man was known for committing violence and sexual harassment, but Wheeler's victims never reported it because they were afraid. One day, when Denver and Evangeline came to their house, they saw Wheeler had killed his wife and then committed suicide in front of them. Evangeline can't get over it and thinks there should be something they can do. Evangeline blames Denver, which is why Evangeline was transferred to the troopers. Not long after, Evangeline met Denver to work together to examine the connection between Annie's case and scientist Salal. From the items found in the trailer, they need clarification about why Annie and Raymond kept their relationship a secret. They even wondered how the two people could meet. Most of the photos they take are selfies, but some are candid, meaning there is someone with them. In one of the photos, Annie can be seen dyeing her hair blue, and in one of the photos, you can see spots of hair dye left behind. Then they continued their investigation by going to the only salon in town. They asked the salon owner why she lied the first time Evangeline asked her. This woman explained that she had gone to Solo Station to cut the scientist's hair. Annie wanted to go there with her one day, and that's when she met Raymond. Their relationship continues, and Raymond is not rude and very crazy about Annie. However, Annie turns strange when she doesn't want to tell anyone about her relationship with Raymond. The reason the woman who owned the salon didn't tell the police was that she was afraid, because the woman who owned the salon was also dating someone from Salal. This man was named Oliver, but he was not named at Solo Station. It turns out Oliver left before Annie died. Last she heard, Oliver had joined a hunting group. After Annie's body was found, someone called the police about Raymond, and the person who answered the phone was Hank. Elsewhere, Hank comes to Peter's place, who is still watching the scientist, who is starting to melt. At the same time, Evangeline and Denver arrived. Evangeline is angry because Hank didn't tell her information about Raymond. Denver separates them and also throws Hank out. there is still a snowstorm, so the forensic team can't arrive until tomorrow. Peter mentioned that he had a cousin who worked as a veterinarian. Maybe Denver could use him. Turns out Denver agreed. Meanwhile, Lee joins the demonstrators who will demonstrate because mining is increasingly polluting their environment. Not long after, Leah came home. Denver saw Leah join the protesters, which made she angry. Denver doesn't want Leah to join those people because she doesn't want what happened to Annie to happen to her. Leah insisted because, according to her, water pollution had caused the deaths of many newborn children. In another place, Evangeline is told that her sister has escaped from a mental hospital. Evangeline wasn't worried because she knew where to find her sister on an abandoned ship. When Evangeline goes to that place, she can find Julie, who is cold. Julie, who often has hallucinations, looks confused, while Evangeline can only calm her down. The next day, Denver went to the house of the mother who had just given birth. Unfortunately, the baby died immediately. She went to the bathroom, but she could see that the water there was black and polluted. The next day, Peter's veterinarian cousin was at the location of the scientist's body. He explained from his vision that the scientists did not die from cold, but had died before freezing. This was not the form of a person who froze to death, but he also couldn't find out why they died without a forensic examination. At the same time, Evangeline came and told Denver that she had found Oliver. Evangeline goes to the nomads' camp. There, they could find Oliver, but the man did not greet them kindly. They asked what he knew about Annie. Oliver didn't even know that his former colleague at one of the stations had died. Hearing this, Oliver chased them away from the place. Then they went to the hospital to meet one of the scientists who had survived being frozen. Both his legs were amputated, and he was filled with pain. Denver tries to asking what happened at Solol Station. He replies that scientists woke up to something and are now being hunted. Not long after, the scientist has a seizure. At the same time, there is a fight at the hospital, and Denver goes to calm the situation. Still, in the scientist's room, Evangeline was shocked when she saw that the scientist could get up and not scream in pain. This scientist pointed in Evangeline, then had convulsions again, and in the end, he died. Not long after, they met Peter, who had opened Annie's cell phone. There is Annie's last recording before being attacked and killed. Denver is on her way to the ice hockey field the next day because the center will take the scientist's body for examination. On the way, she saw Julie walking without clothes, crying. Denver gave her a jacket to keep her from getting cold and tried to calm Julie down. Denver brought Julie to meet Evangeline, making Evangeline very grateful for this help. Denver didn't go to the ice hockey field and chose to go to the office. Ted also comes to the office to help Denver deal with the problems. Denver says that these scientists died before being frozen. Not long after, Peter showed data on hospital patients who experienced problems like the scientists but survived several years ago. This man was named Otis, but they couldn't find him. Otis also has problems such as drug addiction. Then Evangeline called Denver and told her that Annie's body was not found in the cave. Even though in the video Annie is attacked in the cave. This means someone killed her in the cave and then moved her to send a message. Then Evangeline and Denver come to Bryce's house. They went there to ask about Annie. At the end of the recording, there are bones on the roof of the cave, and Bryce identifies them as whale bones. Maybe the bones came from a cave whose entrance was closed because the place was fragile and dangerous. They must have a map of the cave to go there because it is very dangerous to enter the cave without a map. The person who made the cave map was Otis. When Evangeline was on her way home, she called home to ask how Julie was, and Julie answered that she was fine, but it was all a lie. Currently, Julie is on an abandoned ship. She took off all her clothes and then walked towards the ocean. Meanwhile, Denver is at home and continues to play Annie and Raymond's last video recording. She saw similarities in how they died, including the sudden power failure. Denver called Evangeline and told her there was electricity in the cave. She believes it is the same electricity used at Solol Station. Because Oliver was part of the equipment setup, he had access to an emergency generator. Denver asks Evangeline and Peter to meet Oliver right now. Time passed, Peter and Evangeline arrived at Oliver's camp. They entered Oliver's house, but they couldn't find him. They could see a circle drawn with a stone also circled on the floor. When they came out, residents were waiting for them. They said that Oliver left the day after Evangeline and Denver first came to the place. Peter and Evangeline hurried away, carrying a stone and a circle they had found there. Then Peter took Evangeline home. When she arrived home, Evangeline received a call from the Coast Guard informing her that Julie's body had been found in the sea. Evangeline immediately went to a mental hospital and was angry. Why did security just let Julie out? But even so, there was nothing Evangeline could do. To express her emotions, Evangeline fights with people on the side of the road. The next day, Evangeline told her that Oliver had disappeared when she and Peter were there. Evangeline wants to show Denver the stone she found at Oliver's place, but she loses it during a fight. Last night, Evangeline also told Denver that Julie committed suicide by throwing herself into the ocean. Julie committed suicide because of her schizophrenic hallucinations. The same thing happened to their mother, and now Evangeline is starting to feel the same way. Denver could only calm Evangeline by saying the same thing would not happen to her. At the same time, Denver receives a call from Peter, who finds an important clue. The clue was a photo of Raymond in a rake, recorded on a CCTV camera. Soon, Denver and Evangeline went to the rake. They entered it, and there they saw a burning fire. That means people are living in that place. They see the circle symbol on the wall and the person running above them. Denver immediately went after him, but it turns out that she found not Raymond but frightened Otis. Otis wears Raymond's jacket. Denver asks where Raymond is now and replies that Raymond hid in the night country. A few days later, after Otis was hospitalized and starting to stabilize, Denver trying to ask what Otis's relationship is with Raymond. Otis answered that Raymond asked how he survived his injury, but Otis didn't know how because it was a coincidence. Otis explained that 30 years ago, when he was working on making a map in a cave with others, the cave suddenly collapsed. When he woke up, Otis was already in the hospital while all his friends had died. Otis shows him where he fell into, and Denver wants Otis to take her to the cave. Denver and Evangeline went to the cave's location, but rocks blocked the entrance so that they couldn't enter. Elsewhere, Leah joins the demonstrators who will demonstrate today. Evangeline was also assigned to organize this demonstration. A policeman attacks Leah, and Evangeline notices, so she manages to save Leah. However, because of this problem, Evangeline fought with the police. After this demo was finished, Evangeline took Leah and called Denver, but it turns out that Denver wants Leah to go to prison to deter her. So Evangeline takes Leah to the police station, but Denver doesn't want to respond. At the same time, Peter explained that if he traced it further, it turned out that Solwell Station and the mining company had the same parent company. The one who determines the value of the pollution carried out by mining is Solwell, so this means that perhaps Solwell has lied about mining pollution, which pollutes the village water. Not long afterward, Denver was called to the mining office to meet Ted and a woman named Kate, who seemed to be a mining official. Kate shows CCTV footage of Denver and Evangeline going to the previously closed cave. Kate asks what she's doing, and Denver replies that there may be a clue. Kate tells her that the scientist who died was not murdered. Ted explained that forensic results showed that the deaths of these scientists were due to an avalanche. Of course, Denver denied this because it didn't explain the injuries the scientists suffered. Denver also said that she knew that Solwell was falsifying the city's mining pollution values. Hearing this, Kate couldn't answer anything and immediately left. Ted gets angry and reminds Denver not to mess around. Denver knows that she is close to solving this case. Ted emphasized that he knew that 3 years ago, at the time of Wheeler's murder and suicide, Evangeline and Denver were handling the case. Ted is sure that Wheeler didn't commit suicide, but that Denver killed him. With this threat, Ted forces Denver to close the case of this scientist's death. Elsewhere, Kate meets Hank. Kate and Hank have been working together for a long time, and Hank was promised a position as police chief in Ennis. However, with Denver's arrival, the position of police chief fell to Denver. Kate knows Denver will not stop looking into this case and must not go to the cave. Previously, the only person who could take her was Otis, so Hank had to get rid of him. Elsewhere, Evangeline's friend managed to find the stone she found at Oliver's place. Her friend said that this rock is usually a sign of danger for hunters, meaning an ice floor could fall and create a cave in the ice. Evangeline met Denver and told her that the way to enter the cave was to look for the highest point above the cave. But Denver said the case was closed because Ted knew the truth about what had happened to Wheeler. Denver needed to find out where Ted got this information, but Evangeline refused to give up. Denver goes to Kayla's house in the evening to pick up Leah. Leah said that what Annie fought for is still happening today. In just the last 3 months, there have been 9 babies who died at birth. Denver asked Leah to come home, but Leah refused. Finally, Denver goes to the village cemetery. Due to the snowstorm, the bodies could not be buried because the ground was too hard there. Denver could see the box containing the body of a child who had just been born. Seeing this made Denver even more determined not to give up. She called Peter into her room and asked who Peter had told about the Wheeler case. Peter denies it, but Ted knows this, which means Hank also knows this. It seems Hank accessed Peter's laptop, which had the password for his child's birth date. From the data, Wheeler is left-handed, while Wheeler's gunshot wound was from the right. This means he didn't commit suicide. Plus, all the case files disappeared due to the flood. Denver admits that she and Evangeline killed Wheeler. Then Denver gave Peter the key to the warehouse behind her house, and she wanted Peter to hide there. Denver goes to the mental hospital to pick up Otis to take him to the cave. Otis is willing to help her as long as Denver gives him heroin. Some time passed, and Denver and Otis arrived home. Otis shows her the highest point in the cave, and then Denver gives him heroin. Not long afterward, Hank came to Denver's house. Hank says that Ted asked him to bring Otis. Denver is shocked and asks how they knew Otis was at her house. Hearing this, Hank no longer pretends and wants to take Otis. Otis tries to escape, so Hank is forced to shoot him. At the same time, Peter appears with his gun pointed at Hank. He saw that his father had just killed Otis. Peter aims his gun at Hank. Hank said that he didn't kill Annie and only moved her body. Hank aims his gun at Denver, so Peter is forced to kill his father. Not long after, Evangeline arrived. They couldn't report other police, so they had to clean up the bodies of those people. Peter is willing to clean up the bodies of his father and Otis so that Denver and Evangeline can go to the cave to find the truth. Denver and Evangeline have reached the highest point of the cave. They can make an entrance to the cave where Annie was killed. They started exploring the cave, but Evangeline started hearing strange whispering sounds. Instead of being afraid, they followed the sound and entered a small gap in the cave. Evangeline was sure that this place was the place they were looking for, but what they saw was a dead end. Suddenly, the cave floor collapsed, and Evangeline fell. Luckily, she survived. Not long afterward, Denver also fell to the same place. There, they saw Raymond running away. They chased him, but their attention was diverted when they saw much sophisticated equipment in that place. They became alert, but they couldn't find Raymond. Above where they were standing, they could see the bones of the organism Solal was targeting. This means they are in the same place where Annie was killed. At that place, they also found a sharp object with a star-shaped tip, precisely like the wound on Annie's body. This means that the person who killed Annie was not a mining person, but a scientist. There is a sliding shelf that reveals a ladder leading upwards. They climbed the stairs, which led them to Solal Station. They split up to find Raymond faster. Denver enters a refrigerator-like room, but Raymond locks she there and runs away, leaving Denver behind. Raymond also managed to attack Evangeline. Finally, Denver managed to free herself by breaking the glass with force. She quickly looked for Evangeline, but she found Evangeline, who was beating Raymond. Raymond was still alive, even though his condition was horrible, so he was tied up and interrogated. They asked whether Raymond loved Annie. Then they put on a headset containing the recording of Annie's murder over and over again. After Raymond had suffered enough from the recording, they removed the headset. Raymond, who was very depressed, finally explained that Solal had found microorganisms that could save many people, but the problem was that the layer of ice there was too hard so that they couldn't remove it by force. The scientists asked the mine to produce more pollutants to soften the ice. This would make it easier to remove the microorganisms, but Annie found their records, so she knew what was going on. One day, Annie sneaked into the cave and destroyed the results of years of research. The angry scientists viciously attack Annie. Raymond tried to stop them, but he couldn't do anything. At that time, Annie was still alive, even though she was covered in wounds. Because he didn't want Annie to suffer and have his discovery stopped, Raymond was forced to kill her. But Raymond didn't know who cut Annie's tongue. The scientists enlist Hank's help in removing Annie's body. They believe Hank was the one who cut out Annie's tongue to send the message. Because of the storm, they could only wait until the storm stopped before handing over Raymond. After Annie's death, Raymond began to see and hear Annie often. That's why Raymond went crazy. Raymond was scared when the lights went out and hid in a cave hole. From inside, he heard his friend's screams, but Raymond didn't want to open the door. This meant that Raymond didn't know what killed his friend. Denver leaves them and decides to rest, but she wakes up because the entire city's electricity is out. She was cold and saw that the exit door was open. There, she saw Evangeline and Raymond's bodies, which had frozen to death. Raymond is the only witness they have to solve this case because of a power outage and a snowstorm. This made the place very cold. Denver can't find Evangeline, so she looks for her outside. At the same time, Evangeline was hallucinating as if she were walking in the summer. Denver had found her, but suddenly, her footing broke and made her fall into the water and drown. But fortunately, Evangeline managed to save her. Denver was very cold, but could get through her critical period with Evangeline's help. Elsewhere, Peter comes to Rose's house and says that Evangeline sent him. Then, they go to the middle of the ice, where they will throw Hank and Otis' bodies into the ice. Meanwhile, Denver and Evangeline were talking, and they remembered that when Raymond was trying to hide, someone had tried to open the door to the cave using chemical liquid and UV light. They could see many fingerprints on the handle. They couldn't get much information from this fingerprint, but saw the right-hand fingerprint without the ring and little fingers. The person who has hands like this is one of the janitors. After the storm stopped, they went to the house of the person whose fingerprints belonged. The janitors had always thought that the person who killed Annie was a mining worker. One day, when cleaning the Solo station, they accidentally dropped the mop bucket to absorb the water into the ceramics. So that's how they were able to find the entrance to the cave. There, she found the tool used to kill Annie. They didn't report it to the police because, until now, the police in Ennis had been very corrupt, especially under Hank's leadership. This made the janitors attack the scientists living in Salal. However, they did not kill them, and the only survivor was Raymond. They were taken away in a truck. The truck took them to the middle of the ice, where they were forced to take off their clothes in the storm, and the janitor was the one who drew the circle symbol on his forehead. They were told to run in the dark. If the ice wanted them dead, then they would die. If not, their clothes are there, and that's why they are neatly folded. Hearing this, Evangeline and Denver now realize the truth of what happened. However, they decided not to report this confession and let the case be closed as Ted's wishes. One day, when the sun started rising, Denver went to Evangeline's house, but couldn't find the policewoman. In the end, Evangeline experienced the same thing as her sister and mother, and that's how the fourth True Detective series ended.